Welcome to Covering Our Bases, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, from Mets to Mariners, we break down baseball's biggest highlights and headlines with unique context from every MLB team's perspective. As we cover our bases, we aim to educate, entertain, and engage the average baseball fan who doesn't have the time to follow the other 29 teams around the league. Expect the fun storylines, patterns, predictions, and pageantry of Major League Baseball to be present at all times. He's NL Dan Harrow. I'm AL Warren Sprague. And Dan, as teams round the bases towards the playoffs, managers are doing everything they can to set their teams apart from their closest competitors. Have you noticed any specific changes in team game plans that may impact the final weeks of the regular season?
Yeah, probably in large reaction to the increased pitching injuries we saw towards the start of this season. Warren, we've seen a lot of clubs actually decreasing fastball usage for a lot of their pitchers, trying to increase the repertoire, the amount of pitches they're using, and using the fastball just more selectively. It's still an effective pitch for a lot of guys. It's just when it gets hit, it tends to do so much more damage that they don't want guys to be leaning on it as much as they have in the past. So we're seeing that kind of odd change. So that'll also hopefully extend the innings for a lot of these pitchers as we enter the postseason, especially starters who have managed to stay healthy most of this year. We could see that, kind of add on a couple innings, which could make a huge difference later in the postseason. Have you seen anything, Warren?
Well, first, to piggyback on the point you made, I have to ask, at the beginning of the season, you're right. We were seeing injury after injury to quality arms, and it did seem to slow down as the season went on. Is that more of a sign of the toughness of who's left, or is that a sign of plans just like this coming to pass and gradually occurring throughout the season? And then I'll do my best to weigh in on a pattern I've noticed. The only patterns I've really noticed are among my Mariners teams because, I've been paying closest attention to them, and all the patterns are negative. So I'll let you respond to my question first.
Yeah, man. It's hard to say. You never know why a guy gets injured, right? Sometimes there's injury history, sometimes there's not. I don't know why, of all the pitchers, including some on my own team, I just keep going back to the start of this year and the Atlanta Braves and their flamethrower who got hurt, Spencer Strider. I just can't keep going back to that and thinking, I wonder if he might make a change going into next year, seeing the way that the pitchers who have lasted this long, exactly as you alluded to, Warren, have managed to stay healthy. And is it gutting it out? Is it just trying to stretch their arm and not push it too much in the right direction? It's very possible. But then you say that, and then we have guys like Paul Skeens going out there throwing just nuts speed constantly, and then only slowing down because the Pirates are making him do it, right? So I think there certainly is some load management that has to be taken into consideration there. And I think rather than being on the players, I think the teams in general, are really going to start pulling back, probably more so like we're seeing with Skeens for their stars. So yeah, hopefully we will see some guys that got hurt this year be able to come back next year and, not give it everything right away, kind of ease into it and hopefully not get injured as much. But who knows, Warren? These injuries pop up like you wouldn't believe.
I believe it because it's one of the hardest things in the world is to pitch on a major league level in this climate right now today. And I want to answer a tad to your question about patterns in the game plans. I mean, one of the biggest things that I've seen from the Mariners standpoint was watching Bryan Woo, who's been kind of the talk of our starting rotation throughout the season, go from being a pitcher who can only do 4 innings before feeling his arm was fatigued enough to be pulled, or at least that's what Scott Service would do, our former manager. Since the last time we chatted, folks, lots of changes in Seattle town. But now we're seeing Bryan Woo get to go the 6 or 7 that we'd like, which isn't just our perspective, right? I think the commissioner is doing his best to suggest solutions to the notion that pitchers should only be doing or may only be doing 3 to 4 innings to start games, especially in the National League. I've noticed that pattern, or, for teams like Cleveland that struggle to have that healthy rotation. How do you feel about that? Are you behind the commissioner doing what he wants to do to change the game so as to celebrate starting pitchers going those 6 or 7 innings by requirement? Or are you of the mind that that's just going to cause worse damage to this extremely pivotal position in Major League Baseball? One last question. I know we're having fun, guys, but the vibe check is going to be a little faster because the low hanging fruit doesn't have a ton of discussion to warrant anymore. Talk to me, Dave.
That's a great question, Warren, and it really makes you think. It makes me think about where the future of baseball is going. And it starts to
Mhm.
make you think, is there a way you could build a roster where maybe you have a series of relievers, 3 to 4 inning guys, and you just have a 2 to 3 starters and then your typical late inning relievers and closer later in the
Mm.
game? I mean,
Mhm.
could we reach a point where we do that and maybe these guys are pitching with 2 days rest rather than the typical 5? And we not even have to expand rosters. So that is a possible evolution of the game. So what the commissioner's doing is essentially like locking us into where we're at. Like, no, starting pitching, we're not doing this. And I don't know, it begs the question. I'd almost rather see a team try it, see if it works. And if it's really that destructive and to the integrity of the game, whatever, then the commissioner can react with a rule or something. But to prevent it from before we even get to that point of even trying it, I don't know. It would be brave. It'd be difficult to do with this set of rules. I don't like the idea of closing the door to it, but I can say that there is something special about having a starting pitcher in
Mhm.
baseball. They definitely tend to
Yeah.
get them and probably the closer if you have an elite closer, but if you don't, they're getting the most eyeballs in terms of defense. And
Oh, yeah.
this is a sport where personality shines when it's given a chance. And we have starting pitchers like Shohei Otani, and obviously we're just talking about Spencer Strider, and he hasn't pitched in months, Warren, right? But we're seeing
Right.
him. So it's an opportunity for personalities. And sure, you could get more personalities with more pitchers, but you are losing a little bit, aren't you? Something about that man on man baseball, like having your starting pitcher out there and having the defense behind that guy. I mean, that there's a mental part to the game there that we would lose if we lose that. So I'm kind of torn, but I personally am gonna plant my flag of I don't like the new rule. I don't. I want to see a team try it first before we start coming up with rules against innovation and trying things.
So here's what I'll say. I mean, the Seattle Mariners, I know, guys, this is so obnoxious how much I can make it about one of the most disappointing teams this year, and it's bar none. But the truth is the Seattle Mariners tend to go out there trying to get their pitcher to be exactly what the commissioner may be looking for, right? A starter who goes 6 innings minimum, 7 if they're cooking at minimum, right?
Right.
That if we could do that, if that's the goal, right? If then and I know we're one of the more stable pitching rotations in the league. It's the one claim to fame we got to lean on throughout the entirety of the year, right? Well, we might be showing that. And not too many other teams, maybe. Milwaukee comes to mind as another one that has a pitching staff that feels strong. Tampa is another one that tends to churn out young arms that can go that length, regardless of the kind of buzz they might have when they're first joined into the organization. But if that's the goal, maybe we're already seeing that. And by the way, apart from Woo's periodical injuries, Seattle's benefited from having one of the healthiest rotations of
Definitely.
this year. So it can be done, question mark, it seems.
It
It will
can.
be interesting to see if other teams can evolve. And I'm not saying we're better, bar none. Obviously, we're not. We'll talk on that shortly. Bottom line is that we do have one of the best pitching rotations, and maybe that's the blueprint. Let's see if some other teams can commit to the model or match that stability. But we'll talk about it, I'm sure, more times in the future as we continue to see his push for a stable starting pitcher role to return to the majors instead of this perception that you could just have the guy out there for sometimes 2, 3, 4 innings before pulling him and letting the, relieving squad do their best to hold the merit of the game. But interesting takes. Sorry to
Yeah.
talk about my Mariners. We're going to get them out of the way early today, guys. I'm prepared. I am prepared to kiss them
It's good.
goodbye for the 2024 season. We'll talk about that here shortly. But it's vibe check time for that reason. Dan, it's been another clip of about 14 games since we spoke, guys. Would have loved to have that 3-series clip like we usually do with 10 games, but ended up needing about 14 because I went on an adventure this weekend. You went to Coors Field. I needed to go see an Angels game against my Mariners. We'll talk on that too shortly. Had a little bit of fun, guys, but I'm going to have my Seattle corner set up just in time for the end of the season, I hope. So hopefully next time we record, my guy, hopefully the next time we record, I'll have a little bit more personality in the background here. But Dan, when should we record last? We were talking on that a little bit. Let's tell our fans when to expect our last vibe check of the season, shall we?
Yeah, definitely. Probably entering the last week of play. So maybe somewhere around what do you think, Roran? The 22nd to 24th, somewhere in that range for the last week of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to kind of highlight the storylines that have developed heading into the final week of the year. Maybe we'll do a little discussing on what the playoffs are like around the league and maybe nominate various teams that could actually be bothered by a bye, since that seems to be a focal point of the last couple years of playoff baseball. This first round bye, is it a blessing or a curse? And we'll discuss that a little bit.
Yes.
But looking at September and trying to find the best week to do it, yeah, man, I think we'll probably target everybody or recording on, say, the 19th of this month should be a good place around that, a Thursday.
Yeah.
So that's the next time to expect maybe our last vibe check of the year, and we might bleed into Sunday. My schedule's been a little strange, guys, as I've gotten into a new role I'll discuss sometime in the future, I'm sure. But thanks for being flexible and riding along with our vibes. But without further ado, my guy, it's time to vibe check our way through another series of games across the league. And Dan, let's make no mistake, I see what colors are in the background. You guys are in control. The Mets look great. Looks like we're going to talk about them maybe in the final third of our show today. But what's with the black and blue a little bit here?
Oh, yeah, man. The Mets have been rocking the blacks on Fridays this year at home, and they have a really good record in it. Not quite undefeated, but it's been carrying us. And I know in the past they've carried that in the postseason, and that's going to carry us into the postseason too. So we're just riding the vibes. We got the black background and the blue waves because we're riding the vibes.
All right, well, ride the vibes into pick number 1, my good friend. We have the 30th worst team in baseball. We've hinted the low-hanging fruit don't need tons of introduction right now. Maybe you'll kick us off with one of those, or maybe you'll surprise me and slide an even more disappointing team across the table. But kick it off, buddy. It's number 30. Who's the worst vibe in the league right now?
Let's do it. I don't know how it could get any worse than the Chicago White Sox. And we're not going to butter it up, Warren. We know that they've already surpassed their franchise worst with 108 losses. They are quickly chasing down the Mets' 1962 record of 120. They're on pace for 125, 126. And I mean, I don't want to kick on them, but I think I've made it pretty clear to you, Warren. I want them to beat the Mets record. There are Mets players still living from that team who say they don't want the record taken from them, which I understand, but I don't want that record anymore. So as much as I don't want to kick on the White Sox anymore, I need them to get that record. And they're well on their way. The next time we talk, Warren, they might have it.
Oh my God. Well, it could I mean, I don't blame you for wanting the Mets not to have that distinction. I can't believe there are players out there, you're serious, who would not want that to be taken from them. That's just because that's their one staple of history. Is that what you're trying to explain? That's pathetic.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry.
It really is.
Don't celebrate being in the Guinness Book of World Records for stinking, Oh my God. So yeah, let's root for that to happen. And when you look at this team, dude, I just want to ask, for fun, at a negative 1.2 WAR, would you call Andrew Benintendi maybe the most disappointing player on this team? Would you call maybe Martin Maldonado, whose catching career may be coming to an end pretty soon with his negative 1.1 WAR this year? Are those the kind of disappointments that we should really think of when it comes to this team? Or are there different failures worth highlighting before we move on from them this week?
Well, you definitely are. Benintendi is a great one to circle as a pretty massive disappointment because I wouldn't want to totally throw some of the older guys on this team under the bus, or even some of the younger rookies who've had to come up in this incredibly difficult situation. You know, we've seen
Mm.
the manager change hands, Warren, so it's hard to circle a certain player when I
Ah,
really feel it's more of an organizational thing. This team was not set up for success. We knew going into the year how bad they would be, and it's almost like the wheels fell off. Good players got hurt, good players got traded, and there was just underperformance to a point where the vibes got worse and worse and worse. This team was probably, we should check, and we will before the last episode. This team has probably been featured in the basement of our show more than any other this season.
right.
And the few
Yeah,
times they haven't is probably us trying to be a little bit nice to Chicago. So it's an
sure.
organizational thing. Changing the
Yep.
manager was a step in the right direction, and you can only hope going into next year they have some relatively massive change. But yeah, Benintendi's a good one to circle. Warren, is there one that stood out to
Interesting.
you?
Well, I think the Maldonado name, quite frankly, we need to maybe prepare to say goodbye to him as a piece
He's
in
getting up
everyday
there.
baseball. Yeah. So that's just something worth suggesting. But also guys like Gavin Sheets on the younger end who started hot and finding themselves now at a negative WAR. I know I'm leaning on the word WAR a lot right now, guys, but why not? I like picking a specific statistic and using it as kind of a means for us to progress our convo. But WAR today tells me, Gavin Sheets could have been a little bit more. He was starting off the season hot, but I think he kind of went and backtracked as the team proved that no matter how good one or two people do, it's going to be a moot cause. I mean, Luis Robert Jr. did end up with only half a point of WAR as this season has progressed. So he's not been particularly motivated either. Why would anybody be? So that does sound like a symptom of the organization, to your credit. I'll move us on into our next choice, the 29th. And, I warned, I just want to kind of focus on low hanging fruit anyway. And the team that should highlight next is the Miami Marlins. They're just too much on failure's side here at 4-9 during the week. This is a team that only picked up one more home win since the last time you and I spoke. They're now at 25 for the season. So again, we've made jokes all year that nobody's getting fed in Miami, but it certainly continues. Dan, I mean, like I said, I don't need to justify why they're near the bottom. The record speaks for themselves, and the trends do too. Any thoughts about the Miami Marlins, who I'm sure you've continued to have your eyes on here, watching your division closely as the season nears its final weeks? Where are you thinking?
Yeah, they do have a couple of divisional series because as we reach the end of the season, Warren, we get to that point where we start to have some games that can be impactful. And the Marlins, just by the virtue of the second half resurgence that they've had, and I'll call it a resurgence because they were so poor in the first half, arguably the worst team in the National League, where Colorado
Mm-hmm.
has certainly eclipsed them in that by this point.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason they can't be kind of spoilers down the stretch, Warren. I'm pretty confident that in a couple series here against potentially Minnesota, against the Phillies, to knock them off their pedestal a little bit, they can still have an
Ooh.
impact. Not quite as much as some other teams. They have a series against the Dodgers and the Braves. Certainly, that Braves division, that Braves series is going to be impactful into the wild card race, and the Dodgers with the Padres hot on their tail. So I don't want to underestimate this Marlins team going to the second half. I've been pretty happy with kind of what we've seen from them since the trade deadline, I would say. And I would still agree to have them down here because I do think that raises expectations a little bit. You don't want to see them giving up on the season. And you never know as we get down the stretch. Sometimes that's what you see teams like this do.
Well said. We'll see if guys like Xavier Edwards, Otto Lopez, and Connor Norby, who've been some of the surprising names to generate a decent WAR for their club, Vidal Brujan as well, if you don't mind me saying, can rally around Jake Berger and help crash some parties as the season begins to come to a close. But you have to think about guys like Josh Bell and Nick Gordon as a bit of anchors dragging down the lineup. I mean, Josh Bell has only contributed, believe it or not, a negative 0.7 WAR this season. Perhaps why he wasn't aggressively moved at the trade deadline, was he? I'm trying to
No.
recall. Yeah, see, usually he is. Usually he's interesting enough to some team to get pulled. So the fact that he's still with the club is kind of surprising, except when you look at that number. And then Nick Gordon has also been tremendously disappointing out in left field at a negative 1.8 WAR. That's just an example of the sandbags that just have been tough to avoid in the lineup for this team. Is there enough around the return of a Sandy Alcantara next year to think that the team could be better? Hey, seeing some of these young guys I just mentioned being effective on the field says that they could have enough pieces to be a more formidable force next year, especially with what they might do in the offseason. Any thoughts there before we move on from Miami?
Definitely, because they got a lot of prospects back and the Jazz move, and those are players that might not come up necessarily right now, but definitely next year and certainly in the year following. And Alcantara's your ace. I mean, of any team in the league. So having him back, it makes your pitching staff that much more deep. And they're going to have to try out a lot of guys. Some will work, some won't. But I think it'd be reasonable to say this team could be better next year, just the amount of assets that they've acquired.
It's a very interesting division next year, too, especially with the way the Mets have been playing and whom they may look like. And I'm sure we'll talk on that more as the offseason progresses and we move into our rankings. But yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Last thing on this team, Warren, Skip Schumacher is likely going to opt out of his contract at the end of this year and leave and go who knows where. There's a couple teams that have already released their managers. He would probably have the luxury of going kind of wherever he wants to go, and it likely won't be Miami. So we've seen lots of structural organizational changes with this team that'll probably continue in the form of a new manager. Will that be good? Will that be bad? We'll see.
That's a perfect way to leave the Marlins until our next vibe check. Dan, you have the floor for number 28.
Yeah, Warren, I'm going to continue to be boring. I'm sorry to do it to you, but it's going to be the Rockies.
Okay,
and
that's fine.
I don't really have a whole lot to tell you about them, Warren. They have they've managed a few more wins, but I'm really concerned because they have the potential to kind of be a game wrecker down the stretch here. Their schedule, Warren, if I can read it off to you real quick. They have series against Atlanta, Milwaukee, Chicago, Arizona, St. Louis, and 2 games against the Dodgers. All of those are going to have pretty massive impacts in the wild card race. They're currently in a series with the Braves. They already dropped the first game. And Warren, all of these teams that are chasing around the playoff positions or in a playoff wild card spot, they're going to look at the Rockies as gimmies, just like we've talked about all year. And just as we've seen this past couple weeks, they're good for a few wins, right? So it's just a matter of who are they going to get those wins off of? Are they going to knock some off of LA and Arizona and give the Padres a big boost? Are they going to help out the Mets and knock Atlanta back a little bit? You can never count them out. So that's the Rockies just have to be spoilers the rest of the season here down the stretch.
Right. Look at it, this Atlanta series, the last opportunity to really have an impact on your division, period. I'm sure you're watching those games closely, and the fact that the Rockies gave up that loss in the first game. We'll see if the trend continues. That being said, you do have the Tigers on their schedule too. And obviously the Tigers are vying for a potential playoff, so that could be fun. They will be in Detroit for that. But yeah, the home series against the Cubs, who are looking for that playoff role. We'll talk on them at some point today. And the D-backs too. Like, those are some pretty important home series. And if they can do what Coors Field sometimes allows the Rockies to do and do enough home run hitting to smack some of these better teams in the teeth, it could really have some major ramifications. Yeah. I wouldn't put them too likely to defeat the Brewers, though, as we'll talk on later in the show. That Brew Crew has been on fire. But there is hints that Colorado has a bright future with some of their decisions to extend players we've discussed throughout the season. Is there any hope of a brighter future in 2025 for this team, apart from just being a spoiler this year, potentially, if they get some lucky swings in Coors Field?
There's not a lot. There's not a lot, Warren. It depends on if they choose to do anything in the off season. There's a couple of decent prospects on the team, like we've talked about, and they might lose a couple of guys. Like, we never know with Charlie if he's going to be back for another season, fully healthy.
Ooh, good point.
So we'll see if it's a very similar team or very different going into next year. But I
We
think
can
going in,
definitely see Charlie Blackmon calling it a career after this year, and
maybe.
yeah, I mean he's kind of evened out, given a flat 0.0 WAR. So like, is there any incentive to bring him back anyway?
Right.
Elurhis Montero and Hunter Goodman are among some of the basement pieces, apart from, of course, Chris Bryant. So
Not getting out
this
of that
team,
one.
yeah, as long as Chris Bryant is maybe on the team, do you feel like that might just be the albatross that anchors this organization
It's
to the floor?
It's hard to overcome with something like that. It's hard to be attractive to free agents. Yeah, it's also clogging up your system, right? Because he's automatic when he's healthy, he's automatically just because of the money you're giving him. It's a Rendon situation, right? He goes to the top of the depth chart, so it clogs up your system as well. And yeah, they got at least 3 more years on that. If they want to buy him out, it would just cost so much. They wouldn't be able to do anything else. So you're gonna eat that bullet at least for a couple more years. And yeah, you might be right, Warren. And they might really just be like, okay, what can we do after that contract's off our backs? And they have dead money from several other players over the last couple of years, and might take a couple of years after 25 for them to get that off. But maybe that's the flexibility they'll need. And just kind of biding their time until then.
All right. Thank you, Dan, for that. Let them bide. Let them wait. Let the Bryant fade into the past. But now, let's shake things up. I'm sick of this.
Whoa.
We've been sleeping our way through the first 3 picks. It's time for us to pop off with a little bit of understanding between expectation and what has proven to be the reality. There is a certain team next that is expected to be pushing for a playoff run right now, and instead had an awful week. So I'm going to throw them under the bus next, relatively surprisingly. At number 27, it's a former number 1 team on our list. How about the Boston Red Sox? As a major disappointment this week, okay? There's a wild card squad theoretically trying to solidify that spot. They did take 2 of 3 from Houston. They get swept by the Diamondbacks in a clear sign of, hey, are you sure you're contention worthy? And then in a 5-game set, that's right, the only one of the year I can recall right at the moment, but a 5-game set with Toronto, they actually drop 3 out of their 5 chances. And that's really not good, as Toronto has started to prove, well, Vladdy has started to prove that he still knows what he's doing. And then Detroit, by the way, took 2 of 3 from them as well. And Detroit's nipping at their heels in the playoff contention. This is massive disappointment in Boston. And let's talk on that next. What's going on in Beantown?
Man, it's just the season kind of slipped away with injuries, and by no fault of the starting pitching staff, the kind of glut of younger players. This being actually one of the youngest offenses in the league, or with an average age close to 27, and some of the highest hit numbers for such a young team. So very much still going through the final years of that rebuilding process, you want to say, from these last couple of years. I think that a lot of people will look at the early season success they have and be kind of pessimistic about how they're finishing the year, clearly outside of the playoff picture at this point. They're the closest team in the AL wildcard race, but at 4.5 games back. A relatively difficult schedule down the stretch just by virtue of going against the Yankees and Baltimore and a couple other playoff caliber teams. The season's going to end out of the playoffs for Boston. I'm sure the fans will be disappointed by that, but I think that it should be looked at as a real success. I was really down on them at the start of the year. I will say they did, kind of fall off like I expected them to, but not nearly as much as I did. So still pretty positive. With a positive run differential, this team can take a lot of positives from this year and go strongly into next year. They are kind of sputtering. I will say it's been a pretty steady trend down, and that is unfortunate to see. Especially guys like Jarren Duran, who was doing so well, is starting to kind of cool down a little bit now. And, guys like Devers, who is at least back on the field, is clearly still a little bit hobbled. So they're kind of limping their way to the finish line in my eyes here, Warren.
And you're watching them do their thing right here, right now against your Mets, are you not?
Right.
How's that series progressing for you guys at the moment?
It's going well for the Mets, and it's mostly just been getting on their starting pitching. And our starting pitching has kind of taken advantage of the fact that they have younger hitters and just a lot of breaking balls, a lot of movement. And we've gotten, I will say, a little bit lucky for some defensive miscues that Boston has had. We've talked about how they've been high in the league in errors this year, and I've seen them make several errors in just the 2 games that they've played so far. So those are all things that you hope they're going to work through as they continue to mature and get older. And
Sure.
like I say, this is a young team. Kind of remind ourselves how young this Boston team is. That they have Alex Cora locked up as the manager for a couple of years. Like, this dude's got a plan. So their main focus for Boston the rest of this season is going to be, can they spoil a little bit for some of their divisional teams, right? Series against
Yeah.
Baltimore and the Yankees are going to matter a lot because that's going to come down to that final week. The series against the Mets that they finish up is going to be impactful into that race, and series against the Rays and Sox can add on to their win total. And if they do win a lot of those series, like I said, 4.5 games back, Warren, we've seen crazier things happen this late, right?
Well, we'll see how we feel as we enter the last season or week of the season. It will in our next show. It'll be interesting to see if we have just planted the seed for Boston to blow us both away again after so many times of feeling like on the outside looking in. We'll see if they can. But hey, it's not a good sign when you can't cool off a Toronto team that's been ice cold, right? Except for the recency. And then you go up against a fellow playoff hopeful in Detroit and find yourself failing to keep up with them too. It's really that simple. It's not trending in the right direction for Boston. Hopefully this is the wake-up call for them to get going and find their form again in order to push towards playoff contention one final time. But that's a perfect place to leave Beantown. Please proceed to provide us our next, woeful club at this point at number 26.
Yeah, man, keep it moving along at 26. Another low-hanging fruit, Warren, it's going to have to be the Los Angeles Angels.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, a bullet that would have been easy for me to allow to dodge, having just come off of a series loss against the Angels that I was in attendance for. But go ahead. I'm sure when you look at the rest of their week and you realize that that was their only winning series in the last period of games since we spoke, you can totally justify the fact that the Angels are, pretty poopy. I just wish they'd stop being so motivated against their divisional rivals, if you know what I mean. Give it to me, dude. How do you feel about them and why are they this low?
Well, we're starting to see the effects, just like we mentioned with our last team, of a long season on some younger players. We know that half of this team is quite a bit younger, has been under the tutelage of Ron Washington. I don't know if you saw the game the other night, Warren, where Zach Neto was actually removed after a few innings due to, as Ron Washington said, he didn't say it was a lack of effort. He just said it wasn't his night. But he didn't cover a play at second base, and then he made an error, dropped the ball. It should have been an easy out first. And the next inning, he didn't come back out. So we have Washington very much drawing a line, still trying to establish that 2000s baseball kind of strict mentality system. And I don't know, Warren, I feel like it's starting to drag a little bit. This team has had spurts of success here and there by individuals, but overall, they're continuing that slow slog down. And there's some series down the stretch here where I would hope they would have a pretty significant impact. Obviously, that series with the Mariners was tough, but the fact that they won that series kind of tells me that those divisional ones, you can never chalk those up to just one team, right? And they are going to have a few more opportunities. We're in 7 games against the Astros coming up. I mean, even winning half of those would be kind of significant in what might still close up to be a pretty close race towards the end of this year. And that's sandwiched between two series against, in fact, the Chicago White Sox. If that's not a confidence booster, winning some series against them, Warren, I don't know what is. If they can roll that in to a couple more against Houston, and then they have, let's see, another 2 series against the Rangers and 1 against the Twins. So not exactly easy pickings there, but they're definitely in a position where they can blow some people out of the water. And we know they have the talent to do that. It might pop off only here or there, but we know that they can do that. They can be a game breaker.
I think it's interesting that a Ron Washington stance strongly taken against a guy like Zach Neto, who's been one of the most exciting elements to this team. As a matter of fact, the best in WAR at 4.2 this year for the Angels squad. Is hilarious when Anthony Rendon still has a contract there. Okay.
Yeah.
Now he did get the 2 RBI on Sunday when I was in attendance
He knew
to
you were
watch
there.
the Angels dismiss my Mariners in 2 of 3 games. He did get to be that guy, but that was more Leo Rivas, our young shortstop, failing to come up with a pretty key play, which you kind of have to expect from younger guys. It just hurt like heck, of course. Point being, overall, this is a team that's still trying to decide what they're going to look like in years future, and establishing that new culture comes with a lot of different steps along the way. I don't know if I love everything Ron Washington is doing, and I could tell by your tone, it can sometimes seem a little silly, but hey, at least bold decisions are being made. Bold, uh, well, what's the word I'm looking for? He's putting his foot down and being vocal about it. So it's nice to hear rumblings of any sort of decision for better baseball to come out of the Anaheim club to be happening, but we want to see it on the field. One player I've noticed we might need to get ready to say goodbye to as an everyday contributor from the Angels club is Brandon Drury. He's on a contract year and has only pulled a negative 1.8 WAR. This seems like a guy who might get picked up for a practice, or not a practice squad, but for a spring training opportunity, but may very well be done playing baseball every day. So if you were ever a Brandon Drury fan from his time in the Padres, for example, not too long ago before he came over to the Angels, get ready to say goodbye, I think. What do you I don't know if you want to weigh in on that, or if you should just let me snowball it into my next selection, my guy.
Yeah, you can go ahead with it. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you. I love it when we agree, even when it's sad. How about another team who I think really should be punching harder, just like Boston, and especially in the American League and how loaded it is? You kind of expect if a team is feeling the momentum, they're going to keep it going at this point. Most of the good teams are doing that. And that's why I get to stand on my soapbox long enough to tell you the Minnesota Twins at 4-8 since our last discussion deserve to be shaken up and put low in our account this week. Listen, guys, they gave up 2 of 3 against the Padres, obviously a playoff hopeful. They gave up 2 of 3 against St. Louis, which helped them get their legs back a little bit as they try not to fall completely outside of their own contention. We had them get swept by Atlanta. What's up with that? That's a fringe playoff contender at this point. And finally, Toronto was the only team they could take 2 of 3 from, and that was most recently. Maybe they're turning it around now, but at 4-8, Minnesota was bummed to have this be their outcome, I would think. And I have to see them show that killer instinct. If they're going to march their way into the playoff as they're hoping to do as one of the final wild card contenders, man, you got to have it cooking. Carlos Santana's been swinging it well, and I know Willie Castro has been annoying in their leadoff spot, to say the least. You've got stars like Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton staying healthy and doing what they can do. But disappointing numbers of played games when you look at that. Like Carlos Correa has only played 75, Buxton 90, and Royce Lewis has only played 59 games this year. Are these pieces the reason why? Is that stuff the reason why we're not seeing Minnesota look more dominant? What's your feelings on the Minnesota team as we start to round the bases towards the playoffs?
Yeah, I think you're right. Royce Lewis coming back relatively recently and looking pretty good, but just the too many games missed this year for him to make a little bit more of an impact. And for this team to maybe be what we thought they could. It's worth noting, I should have mentioned it last time, but I didn't. The Carlos Correa situation of him, he's been out of the lineup for almost 2 months now, Warren, with plantar fasciitis. And I will say, I just am reminded of year before last, all the heavy contract negotiations in the offseason with Correa, back and forth with the Giants and with the Mets before going back to the Twins. A lot of concerns on injury, health, and history, and that has turned out to be a thing. I always like to look back on things like that in hindsight, and kind of glad that
As you should, yeah. Really cool to see those patterns come to pass, but continue.
Right. Yeah, so just disappointing to see the Twins not be able to kick it a little bit more. And where they're at right now, Warren, they are a game ahead of the Royals. And like we talked about Boston being 4.5 back, Boston or Detroit would really be the teams to worry about. And down the stretch, you do actually have a series against Boston with the Twins, where if the Twins continue to
Mhm.
lose, that could be pretty huge. If Boston wants to make one last swing in, they might be able to nab that last playoff spot from them. And then a 4-game series against Cleveland, that could be another opportunity for the Twins to take the division or nail in the coffin, depending on which team shows up. So
Mhm.
some pretty big baseball coming up for this team. I don't know what I expect to see. We saw this team kind of get hot last year and go into the postseason that way. No reason they can't do the same thing this year, Warren, but they certainly looked a little more fragile, I think, than they did last year. And that might ultimately bite them before it's
And because we're out of time a little bit on Minnesota, I won't take too much time pointing out what I think is the true deciding factor. Apart from the limited numbers of games played by their offensive stalwarts, we'll say those guys we keep mentioning, the Lewis and the Buxton and the Correa. Let's look at the pitching side. The pitching was way better in Minnesota last year. And if you take a look at what the numbers are being put out in ERA for the pitching staff this year, the majority of them are keeping themselves above the 3. And when you look at your pitching staffs, the rotation especially, I mean, maybe the best and most reliable arm, Pablo Lopez at 4 ERA, is not the most desirable thing to have to say. So the pitching just hasn't been there for Minnesota as well to be as strong as they were last year. And that's where the fragility comes in, not just from the injuries, but from their ability to prevent runs. So let's see if they can stabilize themselves enough against some of those pretty key opponents you discussed. They are one of the more vulnerable teams at this stage, and we've seen Minnesota fall out of races as recent as 2022. Remember, their September
yeah.
was poor enough that they fell out and Seattle jumped in. I can remember that, that's for sure. But well, maybe it will happen again. Let's see if they can get their footing. Dan, that was my second attempt to throw somebody who didn't quite look like a basement team into the basement. It's your turn to continue the momentum for number 25.
Well, yeah, let's keep it in the basement then, dude. Let's go ahead and
Woohoo!
throw out the Washington Nationals. Yes,
Oh
yes.
my gosh. They're number 24, by the way. Sorry, guys. I got a little excited. The Washington Nationals, an interesting choice. You love picking on your divisional rivals.
I
And
do.
these poor guys, though, read to me as more of a spoiler than any of the other teams we've discussed so far. I mean, at least they're winning baseball games a tad. They went 5-7 this week. How can you justify them being truly way down here?
Yeah, for me, the vibes are kind of bringing the Nats down a little bit.
Okay.
This is a very young team. We got stars coming up on this team. Jose Tena, Dylan Cruz, if you saw, has a couple of home runs,
Yeah.
some big ones. James Wood is getting more opportunity now, and just an overall young team that's not winning a lot more than they were before, but getting that playing time together, I think will be impactful going into next year. That's what we always see around September, right? These teams out of the race, Warren, switching to, okay, let's develop this younger talent, get some guys ready. That being said, it's tough to get called up to to the big leagues and be in games against teams that are fighting for a playoff spot, and that could be kind of potentially morale crushing depending on the player, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's a fine line that the Nationals walk. This is because they have a relatively tough schedule the rest of the way. They have a few easy games in here, sprinkled in here, Warren. 5 games against the Marlins, a series against the Pirates, but then they have series against the Braves, the Mets, the Cubs, the Royals, and the Phillies down the stretch. And the Nats certainly are in a position to be spoiler, and I've seen them be spoiler in this division for years, Warren. I've seen worse Nats teams than this in the past beat the Mets on the last day of the season and, knock us out of our playoff spot. It's happened before. So definitely expect the Nats to win a few down the stretch, supposing that they stay on the hot streak they are. The youth that they have, while as good as they are, this might be some overpowering matchups.
They're still spoilers, just a tad. Look at
Yeah.
the fact that in his call up series, Dylan Cruz collected his first hit to help contribute to the turnaround of that series against the Yankees, in which they
Yeah.
took 2 of 3 games. So they did punch a Yankees team in the teeth. There is a lot of buzz around that young call up, and I am excited for the Nationals to still be doing what they've done all year and proving that they can win just about any individual baseball game if the ball falls where it might. So I don't blame you for wanting to throw your divisional rival in here, but I do contest. They're still frustrating, and no one should be sleeping on the nation's capital's baseball team if they're looking for playoff runs. Man, they got to not sleep on the Natties. So that's how I feel. And Dylan Cruz's call up is exciting. James Woods is exciting. Where we've talked about how this team is going to be better in years in the future. And we're getting that little baby preview right now. Enjoy it, Washington fans, because they may knock some pretty important teams out of their respective races if they're not careful. That's just where I stand. Now, less convincing as a team with true bite at this second will finally be the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, let's go with them next, number 23, because not only do they I don't know if rays actually have teeth, guys. Like, I guess they can eat crustaceans and mollusks and stuff, so they must have them deep in there. But you know, when you look at their mouths, they just look like little flappy flaps. I'm sorry, I'm grasping for straws on how to tie this together with teeth. But the point is Tampa Bay has finally decided, you're right, guys, we were messing with you. Okay. With our 5-8 week, we're probably not pushing toward playoff contention. I mean, again, we can always discuss how they can back into it, but they've lost series to the Dodgers, even the Mariners, and the Padres, as well as split with Oakland, in a way of saying this year was fun and gave us an opportunity to learn more about who we're going to look like in the coming years. But Tampa's pretty much deciding, right, and behaving like they have no further ambition to rise up the standings, so we should probably get them out of the way a little earlier, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And they still have some time to get that win total up just a little bit, Warren. And I mean, maybe they can get to 500 baseball. But I think all in all, this season has really been disappointing for the Rays. I think they had higher expectations going into it. And they sold a lot of pieces and they made some moves, but I think they still expected to compete. Just I think they still thought that they could be a playoff team. And at times they still look like one, but it looks like they are ultimately going to fall short. You know, the rest of the way, their schedule is a series against Minnesota, 2 games against Baltimore, series against Philadelphia, and then 4 against Cleveland, and then wrapping up with a series against Boston, Toronto, and then Detroit. Oh, I'm sorry, and then Boston again. So 2 series against Boston. So if this is like we talked about when we mentioned Boston, if Boston can kind of knock the Rays around a little bit and get that win total up, it could surge them. But more and more likelihood they'll end up continuing to play 500 baseball, leave Boston with maybe half of those wins and still out of the playoffs.
Isaac Paredes had the team leading WAR of 2.2 and got traded away to the Cubs.
Yeah.
A true sign of how the Rays felt about this year at the time of the trade deadline. But going back to the beginning of the year, I think you and I discussed how they seem like a team understanding of their one step back mentality. And I think this is actually kind of where they wanted to end up. This is a team that still looks capable of winning in many individual matchups, but is looking forward to the future. I do want to say that in his 20 games with the team thus far, Junior Caminero has already amassed a 0.5 WAR, which matches what Luis Robert has done throughout this entire season out in the Chicago White Sox. What does that say about both players, would you think? Is it exciting to think Junior Caminero can provide a lot of impact perhaps for this Rays team? Or is an indictment on what we're seeing Luis Robert do for his flailing club?
Yeah, it does make Luis Robert look a lot worse. And for Junior, I mean, this is exactly what you need for a piece you can build around. Like Caballero's there too. He's still quite young, and there's still some other young pieces on that team where they can turn this thing around relatively quickly, like we've seen other teams do, right? So it's a huge bright spot. And yeah, just give them as much playing time as possible, right? Excited to see some highlights from him too.
You got to like Richie Palacios as a piece of the future. And yeah, you're right. Jose Caballero, who I know quite well, is disruptive on the base paths and is a great defensive piece and shaping out to be a smart trade for them as they move into the future. So Ever a fascinating team are the Rays, especially this season. They've never felt like they were in the hunt aggressively, but they were never too far outside it. So kudos to them for doing just that, if you don't mind me saying. Europe, my friend, who would you like to call out for our next disappointing squad? We've got 3 left in the 20s. This is number 22.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to do the Cincinnati Reds here, Warren. I think
Okay.
it's their
Yeah.
time with just one series win this week. Kind
Yeah.
of launched them too far south of 500 to put them in any realistic position to end the year. Not gonna have a miracle run like we saw in the past, unfortunately.
Super bummer if you think about it, with how much buzz was coming from pundits, especially, and kind of, fan predictions, with how much the show, the lights, the shining lights of Ellie De La Cruz can make you feel like this team is ready to pop off. This one, yeah, is a bit of a hurt to see them fall to this point in the countdown, but it's completely fair. They lose 3 to Pittsburgh out of 4. They lose 2 out of 3 to Oakland. They lose 3 to Milwaukee. A friendly final reminder that the Reds are not on their level yet, with their only series win coming to the Blue Jays, who should generally be losing their series from this point out, even though they're, Vlad's carrying them in the opposite direction sometimes. This is just a huge bummer. This was a team that felt like they could truly contend right up to the last minute, but it does feel like they've taken one too many steps back. And you have to look at strikeouts from Ellie De La Cruz as a potential, red flag. If his strikeouts are anything like Julio's strikeouts, it's a red flag for both players. But again, let's not make it about Seattle yet. We're coming up on that soon. What are your thoughts, dude? Spencer Steer and Ellie De La Cruz can't do it alone, is my gut reaction. Though Jonathan India did do some good stuff for him coming down the stretch. And Tyler Stevenson, too.
Yeah, a team that was hobbled kind of to start the year and the hand tied behind their back. Definitely the offense probably left some things to be desired from what we've seen them do, but still pretty proficient, not one of the worst ones. It's worth noting, Warren, Spencer Steer with 23 stolen bags, trying to make a name for himself on this team. But Ellie De La Cruz, he's a 61 right now. 61.
Holy Christmas criminy. That's amazing. Yeah.
Insane. And we'll get to it when we get to the Dodgers, but there's a Dodgers conversation of can Shohei steal 60? Because there's what they're just talking about 50. And the fact that Ellie's a 61, he could probably do 70 if he wanted to, but elite company there. And, I just look back on the season for them, Warren. For me, where it falls apart is on the pitching side of things. Okay. You look at innings pitched and active pitchers on their roster right now. They have Nick Martinez. He's just about at 110 innings pitched. And then it's just everybody that's been hurt. It's a list of pitchers who have 5 innings here, 6 innings here, and obviously Abbott, Ashcroft, Green, the list goes on for injured pitchers. So it's a constant rotation. They were behind Milwaukee in starting pitchers. They used looks like 12 different starting pitchers, so not quite as much as some other teams, but still just way more than what you need to be successful on that side of the ball.
Well said, sir. And if pitching was eventually what let them down, that does, of course, make it clear why Frankie Montas, for example, was eligible to be moved off and was at the trade deadline. A team understanding of that continual shortcoming. If they can get some more interesting arms into their organization this offseason, maybe it's enough. But offensively, you have to look at a couple major red flags in the form of a couple players who just didn't get to contribute much. I get a little worried about guys like Christian Encarnacion Strand, who only got to play in 29 games this year and didn't contribute anything positive during that window. And of course, Noelvi Marte was a huge missed opportunity for the club. Will Benson at a negative 0.8 WAR. Well, you have to call that the biggest disappointment. He did get to play 116 games thus far for this team this season. And while he can at times at the plate look completely ready to carry any given day, it's just not consistent enough. And he's on the younger side. Maybe he'll grow into a great third piece for this squad behind Spencer and Ellie, but he's going to have to do it soon, or he's going to lose the opportunity to be so important to the squad moving forward. Is that a place to move us?
Matt
Matt
McLean's the other one.
McLean.
I mean, he didn't even get to play this year.
Yeah. And that's why you can't really call that out, right? I mean,
Sure.
if he had gotten to play a couple games and was able to give them some forward momentum, well, then I guess what we get to look forward to is he might become the new Superman when he comes back.
Yeah.
Certainly he'll have the opportunity to show he can hit more consistently than Ellie. But having that major three-headed squad, I mean, a Spencer Steer, an Ellie De La Cruz, and a Matt McLean could potentially turn into, you mentioned the Dodgers, the Mookie, the Ohtani, and the Freeman of the future. Maybe. Potentially.
Well, 3 MVPs you just named right there.
Yeah, I know. But what I'm saying is they can run that offense.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Just as those guys certainly have in LA. I'm going to continue us on towards a team that, at this stage, it's September. At this stage, maybe the National League Central race isn't completely decided, though it looks like Milwaukee is stable enough to fend off all comers to me. And with certain other teams surging, this team fading into the background is happening about on schedule, just not as deep into the month as I hoped it would be. You guys know what's coming. How about the Pittsburgh Pirates having a 5-8 week and solidifying spot number 21 at this point? They needed to have a better period of time since our last chat when they actually fell to 30th in our discussion, coming off of a number 1 selection from us the show before.
Yeah.
If you guys are following along, what I'm saying is they fell off the cliff. They just fell off the cliff.
Yeah.
Since you and I last spoke, Dan, a 5-8 record, having dropped series to Texas, getting swept by the Cubs, dropping a series to Cleveland, and really only having the 3-1 victory over the Reds we just mentioned being the reason why they get to maybe come after the Reds in our discussion. Skeens wasn't enough. Jared Jones wasn't enough. That's what we get to take away from this. The team still eventually ran out of steam, and you have to perhaps blame the offense, is my thought. But I'm wondering if you want to counter that with me as we discuss the Pirates and where they sit at the bottom of their division at long last here in the early days of September.
Yeah, man, the bullpen has been unreliable on days when you do have like Skeens or even Ortiz has been pretty good of late, coming out and giving you a gem. And, Chapman has always been that guy who he's never been spotless. He's always been good, but he's never been spotless. And you've had a couple blow-ups due to that. And yeah, the Pirates have certainly fallen off, lost some of the sparkle we saw, but it reminds me of the Reds of a couple of years ago. We saw what they can be, Warren, especially with a lot of the youth that they have. How much talent can they retain and carry over into next year? We'll see. Will McCutchen be back? Guys like Rowdy, guys like Brian Reynolds. Not really sure if guys like that are going to return. We did see good things from some of the younger guys, but it's worth remembering the injuries, Warren. And I don't want to make too many excuses, but we did have Cabrian Hayes go down, Andy Rodriguez went down. We have a few bullpen arms that were supposed to be getting some opportunity this year. Dalton Jeffries, Hunter Stratton, they all got hurt a couple months ago. Opportunities for guys that I think the Pirates expected to be a part of the puzzle that didn't really pop up. So certainly fell short of some expectations. And I'll just say that down the rest of the stretch here, there's an opportunity to play some winning baseball series against the Nationals, the Marlins, a couple of tough ones against the Royals, and then the Cardinals, and then the Reds of Milwaukee. And then they end the season against the Yankees, which is just weird to have an AL and NL matchup on the last series. That's just strange, but I mean, who knows? Maybe we could see Paul Skeens knocking the Yankees out of their divisional spot on the last day of the season. How about that?
Well, I would love that. Speaking on Skeens, I mean, I want you to know that in 19 games pitched, compared to, say, Jarrett Jones' 18, they've been the more interesting names to mention on this rotation, of course. But Skeens has pitched 114 innings, and we remember Jared Jones really standing out early in the season, but he's only pitched 101 to this point. So Skeens eclipsed him in that quick amount of time. And Jones's ERA is inflated to almost 3.91. So he definitely has cooled off. If anything, you got to give some credit to Mitch Keller for at least keeping this team still in position. He's been their true well, ace overall, I suppose, all things considered, as contributing the most innings. But hey, when the bullpen isn't there, you find yourself questioning those decisions they made to bring in Chapman in the first place, of course. And you have to think maybe this could be his swan song as an everyday
Right.
contributor to the back of a bullpen in Major League Baseball. What do you think on that?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Wait, you talk about Chapman, right?
Yes, Aroldis Chapman.
Yeah.
Perhaps this
Yeah.
is
At
his
least
last.
as the main closer, probably. Yeah. As a relief guy, maybe there's opportunity there. It's funny. I also was on. I asked because I was on the same mindset for McCutcheon. I thought that's where you were going because you got to wonder, are
Mm,
we reaching the end of him being everyday player status? Because he struggled at points this year.
yeah, you're right. And he's only contributed a total of one WAR for the team. And as a veteran piece who's been enjoying a back-to-back pair of seasons, celebrating his history with the club, maybe the experiment gets to stop now. And maybe it's time to look towards the future and hope guys like Jared Triolo, who plays at second base, but still contributed his own 1.0 WAR, might continue to evolve into a piece that helps this team. Their future center fielder, that's the question I have, right? Like, who takes
Yeah.
that spot? G1 Bay, perhaps, but he's not even broken into a positive WAR this year for this team, and he's only played 29 games. Michael A. Taylor, I suppose, needs to be the thought for the future for this team if they've planned to retain him after this year. I'm not sure what his contract is, right? But he did get to play 104 games out there. He might be the guy, but even he could only give you 0.8 WAR. So McCutcheon was actually a better piece. Not the most compelling thing to look forward to for Pittsburgh. They're not completely composed of a capable lineup yet. And that's kind of proven as the stretch has hit its final weeks. So
Right.
I don't know if my prediction came true or half of it, because obviously O'Neill Cruz wasn't the big guy in the home run derby that I was
True.
playing with at the beginning of the year.
It's been a good year
But
for him, though. Almost 20
yeah,
homers.
September can still September can still bring some surprises. Maybe the Buccos will throw a cannonball or two into some teams' hopes as the season starts to wind down. All right, man, number 20. This is you. I'm wondering who might go next. I could think of a trio of
Uh,
teams that are especially worthy, and I know which one
there's
I'm shooting at next.
Well, I will give you an opportunity then, Warren, because I'm going to go for the Giants here in this slot.
Yeah,
Slot out that
cool.
upper tier. Just under 500 baseball. I think a lot of the same things we talked about with the last couple teams, Warren. And I mean, a little bit more disappointing. Their only series win was against the White Sox, and they couldn't pick up a series the rest of the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. Losing series to Seattle, Milwaukee, Miami following that Chicago White Sox series victory, and even then they lost a game to the White
Yes,
Sox. They
exactly.
were literally the only team to lose to the White Sox since since we last spoke. So yikes. And that loss to Miami here, the most recent series, it just kind of bookends this feeling that the Giants truly are as mediocre as we've hinted they could be all year. I have to be honest with you when I say I know I've really poo-pooed the organization, and I'm sorry. You can argue that another organization that is certainly going to be discussed extremely shortly may be just as, if not more, disappointing right at the moment in the way they handle their
Hmm.
players and their vibes. But the truth be told is that, well, the Giants are a step behind the rest of the league. Kudos to a 6 WAR from Matt Chapman. He's done his absolute best, hasn't he?
Warren,
Trying to keep this working.
he did it. 22 home runs. We didn't think it could be done for the Giants.
We wanted 30. We wanted
Oh,
30.
no,
22 doesn't
I
matter.
lowered the bar in my head to 20.
But raise the bar on Heliot Ramos, who sits at 20.
Yes,
How exciting is that?
absolutely.
Okay, his 2.8 WAR tells us he could be a piece for their future. Tyler
Exactly.
Fitzgerald's come on hot as the season has gone on too. Lamont Wade Jr. has also proven that he's a potential piece for the future. Mike Yastrzemski has joined Chapman in being that veteran piece that does do what is asked of him to help push the team forward. And even Jorge Soler had one WAR with the team before he found his way out in Atlanta. So, the offense has been there. Is it possible it's important to look at the pitching as the reason why this team hasn't gone to the level that they had aspired to this year. I mean, were they ever really set up for success? That's arguable, but
Yeah,
Robbie Ray, for example, hasn't panned out to be
right.
as smart an acquisition as they hoped it would be. Maybe Jordan Hicks gets the most credit for really, truly successfully transitioning into a starter. And Blake Snell, of course, has been truly hot, along with a couple days of being truly cold.
Right.
So those pitching inconsistencies are what I want to circle as the reason. How do you feel? And what do they look
Yeah,
like as they move forward 2025 and beyond?
it's hard to disagree with you there. Hicks is hurt now again, and obviously Ray, we knew that whole situation. That's pretty tough. Um, it is worth noting that Logan Webb was very much the backbone of their rotation this year. Blake Snell obviously rounded out, and he's been much better of late, but it took him a while to get there, and he missed games at the start of the year, so that's taking away from it. And the bullpen was overall relatively solid. However, there weren't any stars. The Rogers, Taylor and Tyler Rogers are pretty solid. Recently, though, the call up Ryan Walker has kind of solidified himself as the closer. I say recently, I mean the second half of this year. Solidified himself and got to that upper echelon with a sub-2 ERA, a 1.9 ERA at this point. So there were bright spots on the pitching, but definitely the starting pitching was not well-rounded out enough. They did not have the depth of the bullpen to help reinforce that. So don't know if there's a lot they can expect from next year. Yunho Lee missed half the season. There's a lot. It's a big commitment. So you hope that he can come back and be healthy for you next year. And it sounds like Blake Snell is going to opt out. So you probably won't have him next year. So a lot of question marks if you even field a better team. Oh, and of course, Yastrzemski, this could be the end of him, as you alluded to.
He's offensively played well, actually. So maybe
but we know how they treat their veteran players, right? His contract's up, so
yeah. Why show the extra loyalty? It's true, especially with some really young pieces. Some exciting young pieces truly showing what they can be. Yeah. You look at Fitzgerald in right field. Heliot Ramos can obviously patrol the entire outfield. He plays at center though, and you'd probably want to keep him there. Michael Conforto, I'm not sure what his contract looks like if he continues on. He could be another vet that gets to leave if that's the case.
He's on a 1 year.
I think he's expiring. Yeah. So this is going to be undergoing some pretty important changes moving forward. Ryan McKenna's on the bench for this team, if I'm remembering correctly, and I quite liked him as a piece out in Baltimore. Last season, as recent as last season. So maybe if he's continuing to be under contract, he can contribute, but they might need to start thinking about the outfield of the future with a little bit more focus. Surprised to see, sorry guys, I got the hiccups today. Surprised to see Thairo Estrada, by the way, get released. But Jun-Hoon Lee, yes, if he comes back healthy, he's your center fielder of the future. Pardon me. Took me a second to realize that. But yeah, I thought Thairo Estrada was going to be an infielder for this team to rally around for years ahead. And instead he finds himself on the outside looking for a new organization. I haven't actually looked to see if anybody's picked him up, but I was a bit of a surprise because I felt like he was a building block when we opened the season, and now he's outside the club. Any thoughts there? Is that just another symptom of an organization that disrespects its players? Or did Thairo just not have enough in his tank to be a contributor at the major league level, well enough to justify his position?
I thought he had enough, but I think they're looking to save money where they can at this point, considering the win totals and the amount of prospects that they have. They'd probably rather give the playing time to younger prospects, right, in this situation. That's probably what it came down to.
Well, thanks for that, man. We'll see how the Giants might shake down as the season switches over to a new year. What are they going to do to try to be a contender on paper next year? I'm almost afraid for them, right? I think they should lean into their youth movement, as we talked about in the past. Let the younger guys who are showing what they can do continue to do so, and try to get, try to do what they've been doing and signing those veteran pieces that might complement that. And maybe hope that they get well put together on the mound. The mound is definitely needing some reconstruction for them.
Can't be worse than the Rockies next year, right?
They could be worse than the Rockies. They could.
Ooh,
you never know.
Oh, hot take.
Hot take. I've been saying that for a couple of weeks that I feel like the Rockies are trending in a much more positive direction compared to a San Francisco, but that was me being extra salty,
Sure.
just like Oracle by the Sea. Anyway, speaking of sea, it's time to get this out of the way, guys. Yes. Ha! At number 19, I cannot possibly justify the Seattle Mariners being anywhere higher in today's discussion. The vibes are terrible. They really should have been lower in terms of just the morale I feel around my squad because, Dan, look me in the eye. Speaking on the division, Mariners are done. And honestly,
Or
for
no.
the wild card, there's a couple of wild card teams that are trending more positively than the Mariners right now. And on paper, it feels like we're going to miss this playoff after all from the way we've been playing. I mean, let me tell you the facts that lead me to this decision. By the way, since last time we spoke, it happened. I said I wanted a new voice for this team. Scott Service is out.
Yeah.
Mariners Hall of Famer Dan Wilson is in. And Edgar Martinez, another Mariners Hall of Famer and a Hall of Fame baseball player, period. He's our hitting coach. So
let's go. That's awesome.
That's something for the future, right? And I know right now we had an opportunity to either be galvanized, and it hasn't happened. It's we've fallen backwards under this new regime. It looked like we could trend better after taking series from San Francisco and Tampa Bay. But the truth is we were swept by the Dodgers, and a defining opportunity to see that we're just not there yet as a playoff team, in my humble opinion. If our pitching couldn't get us by the Dodgers, our offense certainly won't, and really doesn't justify us getting to the dance, really, especially when you look at the other Los Angeles team, the Angels, taking 2 of 3 from us. Well, we were on the road. We've been such a bad road team. It's just too little too late. And honestly, it's been too little too late. I just kept thinking these offensive players would start dialing in, but I think we're a team of mental instability, a tad, and I don't mean that from a we can't think standpoint, just from a pressure standpoint. I think this is one of the franchises that is most burdened by their team history. As you've pointed out, they've been the poverty franchise, right? They've been the team that has done the least to make it into the history books in a positive light in the entire MLB. It's by the grace of God Ken Griffey Jr. was a Mariner, because he's single-handedly our greatest claim to fame, with Ichiro and Randy Johnson maybe being in the conversation too. But I'm just sounding like a bad fan, because that's what it feels like we are at this point. We're a bad team, okay? We have struck out at this moment. It's not even probably updated to the true appropriate number, but 1,406 times when I last looked. Dude, what? We're the worst in the team as we have been, or worst in the league as we have been all year. And you could blame it on guys like Cal, who is the most frequent strikeout artist on the squad, Cal Raleigh, big dumper. But he's also hit the most home runs and has definitely been our MVP in so many ways. Like, any of the positivity that you've had about this team have either been about the coaching rotate or the pitching rotation, or truthfully, underneath it all, it's been Cal Raleigh, because he's had a hand in that rotation as the starting catcher. I'm in a bad mood about it. I've told you what games we lost. Looking forward, we've already lost 2 of our 4 opportunities against Oakland to continue to disappoint. Sure, we might beat St. Louis. Sure, we might, split against San Diego. I can't say we're going to sweep them. There's no reason why I'd believe that in a 2-game set. But after that, this is a squad that has a total upwards climb. We'll have to sweep the Astros to look like we even belong in postseason conversation. And that's all the way up near the end of the month. So I'm not holding my breath. Dan, what do you think, dude? You've been kind enough to suggest I'm being a little too negative, but I'd rather be super duper negative, guys, because I feel like whenever we say something definitive on this show, maybe I shouldn't even finish the sentence. Whenever I say something definitive on the show, it goes opposite.
Right.
Man, I probably just tainted my chances. But I think my team's done, Dan. How do you feel?
Man, I understand that perspective, especially just considering that wild card race is a little bit tighter with Detroit and Boston right there, and Tampa technically not out of it. Things could go right. We talked about how the Astros could kind of get kicked around by the Angels, and if the Mariners could take that series from the Astros, and that would certainly go a long way. And I will say, strength of schedule, you got 5 more games against the A's, 6, 7, I'm sorry, against Texas, a series against St. Louis. They're not gimmies. And you mentioned how the struggles on the road, but you do have about half on the road, half at home. So the chances are still there. I don't want to count out the Mariners just yet, but it is obvious to see at this point, post-trade deadline. I think we can say that Cal has definitely been the best slugger on the team, but his batting average is pretty low. And, the home runs are fantastic and he's leading by far, but I think that alludes to a little bit of a lack of power from the rest of the lineup. And Randy's probably been your best all-around overall hitter, maybe right there with Justin Turner in certain situations of late. But even that is not good enough to really get you into the upper echelon. I think as many changes as we saw going into this season with the Mariners, I worry that we're going to see even more of these names go. I've mentioned Crawford to you a few times that the Mariners would choose to make an upgrade at shortstop. And now obviously kind of the whole rest of the infield, I think you could argue that there's opportunity there. Maybe not everywhere, but I think that there's a conversation you could have at pretty much all, maybe not third base. If you want to hold on to a Rojas, who is still relatively, well, I guess he's not young anymore, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks for passing it back. I think you're absolutely right that JP Crawford could be the really painful goodbye that we're building up to, because I think we wanted this guy to be, and he's still under contract, mind you. This is not, there's no reason for this guy to be on his way out, with the exception that we choose for him to be. But last year was a revelation of what he could be, and he's certainly regressed hard this year. And when you watch him at the plate, he's nowhere near as patient or as trustworthy as he was last season. And I love the vibes, and I love what this guy embodies. I like JP Crawford as a human a lot. But if he's just not potentially the shortstop of the future for us, and we just have to look at that, especially when we are one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for? We're one of the most blessed franchises in the league in terms of future prospects. Guys like, Colt Emerson could come up. Cole Young could come up in the coming years and be the next wave of Mariner talent to stand alongside Julio and Robles. And the bigger thing I need to talk on is that Randy Arozarena, there's reason to believe that if he's not finding enough value in this lineup, that the Mariners may not choose to pay him and instead trade him in the offseason. Ryan Divish, the beat writer for the Mariners, has had a few conversations I've listened to about it's a real thing. If they're going to invest more money into a quality player, we want to make sure it's quality player.
Right.
But man, it just seems like such a vibe killer when you watch Randy next to Julio. You kind of want to see it grow up into something, especially with Robles too. They have a cool dynamic. I hope that doesn't come to pass, because it just shows more inconsistency in the decision-making of this franchise. And truthfully, Jerry Dipoto, who's been putting everything together in the front office, is also potentially on the chopping block. Some are saying that all the signs point to him remaining with the team, but at the same time, he's put this roster together, and as excited as certain people were, including myself, at the beginning of the season, they haven't performed. And how much longer can this team not perform before the fan base is fed up? We're the only American League team in the history of the game that doesn't have a pennant. We want that to change really, really, really badly. And the players feel that. And I think that's part of the mental problem with where we're at right now. The good news is,
sorry, Warren, just jump off that. That's why I would say your pitching staff is so good right now, and your average team age is already creeping up, and you talk about the prospects and the players. Would you rather see the Mariners give some of those prospects a chance here? And some, sure, but I'm talking 4 or 5 of them a chance as starters. Or would you rather see them? No, next season. Or would you
Okay.
rather see him spend the offseason going out and getting talent to try and compete next year while you have this amazing staff that you do? Because any prospects you call up, they could shine, but they just as equally could struggle for a year or two before they really hit their stride. And you might not have that benefit of that amount of time to wait.
Well, at shortstop, Colt Emerson or Cole Young look good enough to potentially replace JP Crawford, ASAP Rocky. I think if it were me, guys, I'd trade JP Crawford for what I can get. And let
Might not be
Colt
much.
may not be much. I'd let a Colt Emerson come on up or a Cole Young. I even like, quite frankly, Ryan Bliss. He's not under the radar for me. I think he's somebody who can evolve into a huge infield piece for us, especially in time for a guy like Jorge Polanco to leave the team. Lazaro Montes in outfield could be an answer with a lot of power if Randy Arozarena cannot improve. Harry Ford, of course, is the backstop who's highly ranked in the Mariners prospects pool, but, could be making it to the club next year. At Cal's position, what does that mean for Cal? Harry Ford got a lot of national attention during the World Baseball Classic last season when he played for the UK. So he could be ready to take Cal's spot if they want to do that, if Cal can't get better. And then Felton Celestin is another shortstop who can probably bleed over to third base, for example, if he comes up in the next handful of years. But we're looking at him in 2028, it would seem. Yeah. Point being, there's so much that is in the prospect pool, but I think JP Crawford is the most expendable and likely piece to be moved as a surprise from this team. And it wouldn't really be that much of a surprise when he's doing what he's not doing, and that is carrying the team offensively and performing well at the leadoff role. I think Julio should be leadoff, and I think a lot of people echo that. It gets the pressure off him, and that, well, I mean, it changes the pressure, right? Either you start off hot for the game and help us look great and get the vibes the right way going. Plus, you run all those bases like he's such a good thief. I don't know, man. I think we're under reconstruction, and that's why I can't bank on us making it into the playoffs this year. And thanks, everybody, for another 6 minutes on the Mariners. What that will mean is we won't have to talk about them again today. Well played. Number 18, unless you have anything else you wish to say. Oh, I do want to say there's buzz around us trading a starting pitcher. So, joy. Could it be Bryce Miller? Could it be Logan Gilbert? Could it be, I don't think it'll be Brian Wu, but those are the two names maybe most likely to be moved from that starting rotation. Do I want that? No, but it's not my choice. This is the organization. I'm not the organization. Oh, more answers.
Great return.
Oh, man, it would be a great return for somebody like Logan Gilbert.
Have to be.
I'd hate to lose him, but I'd be a fan wherever he goes. I actually want to get a jersey of Gilbert, to be candid. But go ahead, my guy.
Well, wait till he gets traded in there. Half price.
Stop it. I hate you for even saying that to me. How could you? I'm just kidding.
So sorry.
It's okay. We'll see what happens. Who's next, Dan? Take us away from Seattle, please.
Next
Get us
up.
Anywhere.
Well, let's not go too far. Let's head down to the Bay Area and talk about the final stretch for the team in Oakland. Warren, this is it. A few more weeks of baseball in Oakland, and then they're done, which is its own kind of thing that we could be sad about. But I'm a little mad, Warren, I got to tell you, because this team, the Oakland Athletics, called up a bunch of their prospects for the end of the season, and they're raking. Do you remember Lawrence Butler? From earlier this year, who got mysteriously sent down, and now, well, guess what? He's back, and he's absolutely destroying the baseball. Number 1 overall in power in the last 7 days in the league. I mean,
ridiculous.
It's just so frustrating, right? So many of these players, when it happened, we called it out that they didn't want to have a winning record with a lot of these guys. Probably some service time manipulation in there too. And now they call them back up, and they're doing great. Like Langoliers has been on a run. Brent Rooker has been super hot. Even Seth Brown, who was kind of struggled a little bit recently, is finding it again. And, it's Mason Miller, still Mason Miller, Warren. Like, there's so many bright spots on this team. It just makes me think, like, could they have competed a little bit harder this year if maybe they were really given a full roster, because they weren't exactly buried by injury. And I mean, they didn't have the most sparkling starting rotation, but it's honestly a lot better than a lot of other teams in the AL, I think we'd say. So weird spot that the A's end up in here. I'm tempted to. I was tempted to have them a little higher. I got to be honest with you, Warren. I feel like the vibes are good with the younger team right now, but at the end of the day, it's still kind of disappointing. Ultimately, where they're ending up, and who knows what the feelings of those last few games in Oakland will have. If it'll kind of inspire the Athletics, or if the frustration will boil over.
Gosh, you expand to 15 days, and Lawrence Butler's the number 2. He's still in that player efficiency rating. What a cool piece! But you have a soapbox to stand on. It's not out of the question. Brent Rooker, Seth Brown joins Butler in being so formidable. I do love me some Shane Langoliers. You know how I feel about catchers as a position, and I think he's really pretty stable. JJ Bleday has been impressive for them too, all within the top 50, by the way, all apart from Langoliers, actually, all in the top 50 of player efficiency ratings in the last 15 days. All those guys I just named, even little JJ Bleday. So you're right. Offensively, that's not their problem. It is the pitching. It is the uninspiring pitching that would make us think that Oakland already knew that they could barnstorm some wins. They just couldn't prevent the runs well enough to stay truly in contention. It's just a weird place because these are already young, super talented players. What do? Trade them for other younger, eventually super talented players? Like it's kind of a fun place to be in a way, but I do wish they had that competitive edge in this last year that they never had. They never had this year. And it's really just because of the starting rotation above all. Much as Paul Blackburn tried to prove that in an opposite direction before his move earlier this year to your squad, buddy. I wonder how he's been doing for you, actually. But we'll get to that later. Of course. It's the Mets. But he did such a good job keeping them under consideration with Oakland earlier in the year. So you're right, man. Maybe if they had the mental thought process that they were competitors, they would have competed. But they just didn't. This organization's in too much flux. It'll be interesting to see what all these young guys get to do. Do they stay long-term through Sacramento, or do they get traded for even more young pieces that debut when the team is reinvented in their new home?
Right.
Lots of questions abound.
Trade one of these pieces like a Lawrence Butler or somebody to a Seattle for a starting pitcher, maybe a little bit of a win-win on both sides, Warren. I mean, 27-17 in the second half these days are. So that's winning baseball, So these kids are certainly getting a taste of how to win games, and they're showing off. It's exciting.
I'm looking forward to the season winding down for us to start seeing the speculation that inspires suggestions, just like your Butler suggestion there. I'm not going to sit here and play speculation now about the offseason, but it will be a fun topic here in coming weeks. And a lot of Oakland will be in that discussion for sure. They are the biggest question mark culturally in the league right now. They're one of the biggest question marks culturally in the league in the last couple decades, wouldn't you say?
Yeah,
maybe
definitely.
Ever since the Montreal Expos got moved over to Washington. That's kind of what this is hearkening to.
And they'll continue to be for the next probably 2-3 years.
Dan, let's talk about another team that should be the focal point of a lot of our baseball discussions over the next several years. And in this case, they've been a big focal point this year as the hottest rising stock in the American League outside of Boston. It's your Kansas City Royals, guy. You thought this team had a chance at the division, but recent results are saying they're actually not marching forward with the most certainty as we thought, especially letting me down tremendously, dropping 4 games to Houston. These Royals did win series against Cleveland, taking 3 of 4. That's huge. And then taking 2 of 3 against the Angels to continue to underline their potency. But they did give up a series loss to the Phillies, 2 of 3 against the Phillies. that, well, says maybe they're not ready for the big time. Maybe they won't make it deep into the bracket should they bust into the playoffs, but they're on pace to do so. How do you feel about your Royals pick and where they stand right now? And I'll hope I get to weigh in once you've told me how you feel.
Oof, man. 7-game losing streak right now. So the vibes are certainly going in the wrong direction, and all the injuries are hitting them at the worst time, Warren. So Vinny is going to be out for the rest of the regular season, and he might well miss the rest of the postseason as well. Very unfortunate.
Huge hit.
Their stud closer, Lucas Eckridge, got hurt on a comebacker. He was day-to-day. He will probably be able to come back, luckily. And, of course, Michael Lorenzen has also gotten hurt recently, just to continue to add to those woes.
Yeah.
A couple names coming as reinforcements, though, Warren. At first base, Yuli Gurriel is now basically getting the starting time. And then...
Wow.
And I don't know if you heard, Warren, but after getting cut in St. Louis, Tommy Pham is a Kansas City Royal, which just seals the deal for me, Warren. They are going all the way to the World Series. Done. That they got Tommy Pham, just like Arizona last year. It's a lock.
Wow. Right. Whoa. Tommy Pham, was he the focal point that led to Arizona's elevation? Well, Dan says yes, and that's the Royals' ticket to the World Series, even without a Vinny Pasquantino. What a bold take. I am putting that in our notes for the rest of the season. KC is World Series bound, says my guy Dan. I love it.
They got Bobby Witt. I mean, come on. No one's even close in the AL, right? I know that there's a conversation with Judge, but it's got to be Bobby Witt, right, Warren?
Oh, man. I don't think so. Sorry, but he has certainly become the next superstar, right, in Major League Baseball. I when Julio was anointed one a few years ago, everybody had said, yeah, but Witt is next, and he's proven that. So he's awesome. He's been a great focal point of everything positive, but also give some love to Salvador Perez for having one of the best seasons you can ask a guy in his experience pool to have. Like, he's been huge as basically the foundation of their lineup, right? The
number
floor.
2 in home runs behind Bobby.
Tremendous work, right? Yeah. And Bobby Witt Jr.'s hit 30. God, I wish I had him on my team, right?
Don't we all?
Don't we flippin' all? But yeah, it makes this like one of the bandwagons I want to hop on. I say in my hashtag this week, I'm preparing to jump on all the bandwagons and away from my Seattle team. And Kansas City's definitely one of them, dude. I've had such a blast watching them rise up the rankings. And yeah, a couple of those signings in the last steps of the year could prove to be super pivotal, whether it be Tommy Pham or Gurriel. It's exciting stuff. But then I have to say one last thing on them, on this pitching side. Cole Reagans has been such a great revelation for them, but Seth Lugo, Brady Singer, like they've been really benefiting from one of the finest starting rotations in the league, period. And that is a blessing. Speaking as a Seattle fan, I know how important it is to give your starters lots of touches and keep that consistency. And that's been one of the reasons why Kansas City has been able to rise. And that deserves a little love. And one last time, Dan, Lucas Erceg. Say it with me. Lucas Erceg. We got this, guys.
Beautiful.
Teaching Dan how to pronounce names one question mark at a time. Love you, bud. I hope that didn't offend you. Just having some fun. All right, guys. Moving on into the next portion of the countdown, we are out of teams that even dwell among the disappointments, and even Oakland did deserve to rise beyond that. How about another team that really actually counters what I just said? At a mediocre week, you'd think of them instead to be one of the best teams in baseball. So for them to have a literally 6-7 week, just slightly losing, the Cleveland Guardians need to go next. The team Kansas is chasing. They just didn't have what they've had throughout the season to help them look like the best team in the American League, as they fell 2 of 3 to the New York Yankees. They beat Texas 2 of 3, but you have to expect that, as Texas has proven they are on the outside looking into playoff contention this year. Another team that's done this week, perhaps, even though they did have a winning one. We'll talk on them soon, obviously. They dropped 3 to Kansas City, so I really should have had them before the Royals, if you think about it. But again, vibes be vibes. They did win 2 of 3 against Pittsburgh to try to retain some normalcy. But hey, Jose Ramirez is mashing, right? You've still got Stephen Kwan in the center of it all, playing the perfect Scottie Pippen to his Michael Jordan. And Andres Jimenez has really flourished in the late portion of the season too. Josh Naylor is your heart and soul of the squad. And guys like Will Brennan, David Fry, Bo Naylor, they continue to contribute. Brian Rocchio as well at shortstop has been a really strong piece, contributing his own 1.7 WAR. Lots to love offensively for Cleveland. Dan, what's their Achilles heel? Starting rotation. How are they doing there? And is it still what could remove them from the divisional title and give it to your Kansas City Royals after all?
That's the interesting thing, Warren. The bullpen's been as steady as ever, but they have actually given some opportunities to a couple of new names. They made a trade for Alex Cobb earlier this year. He's finally gotten a few starts in, so he's actually got his ERA down to 2.76 through 3 starts. Mm-hmm. And then another free agent that they grabbed before the deadline, Matthew Boyd, through 4 starts, has his ERA at 2.38. So a couple of the names. Mariner. There you go. A couple of these names are actually giving the Guardians a little bit of a boost, which is exactly what they needed, because you're right, Warren. Offensively, this team has got it. They have one of the best bullpens, and especially back to the bullpens in the entire league, if not the American League, certainly. Yeah. Not a whole lot of injuries at this point. If anything, their lead on the division, while it's relatively safe, it was a little shaky for a minute there, and I think some stumbling by the Royals has kind of calmed everyone down. But I think from what we've seen in the last few weeks, as far as the Guardians, Twins, and Royals are concerned, it's not necessarily safe. So the Guardians certainly are keeping their foot on the gas here down the stretch. They don't have the toughest schedule, but there are a couple series that maybe they can have a wrench thrown into it, Warren. And I don't know if the Royals really will be able to pick up enough. I mean, the Guardians have a series against the White Sox, the Rays, and then 5 against the Twins. Those should be some easy wins to help pad the number up a little bit before closing the season against the Astros. So we'll see how it finishes out for him, Warren. I think that they're just riding the hot momentum into what should be a first-round bye.
Ooh, we'll see. Yes, it could potentially happen as such. However, worth mentioning is that it's actually Minnesota whispering just a little closer into the Cleveland Guardians' ear at this moment at 4.5 games back, and Kansas City at 5.5. So the division is still up in the air, to say the least, and with some series coming up against them, no doubt, right? Some more opportunities for those teams to get closer. You're right to think the division lead won't be safe. Maybe Royals will surprise us. They certainly seem more ready, perhaps, if they can flip the vibes than what Minnesota's been able to do this week. It's going to be fun. It's a triple threat match. And who'd have thought? Because we didn't see that coming in the American League or National League Centrals, right? We thought those were the weakest divisions of their respective leagues. But this American League Central has shaped up to be truly fun. And with all 4 teams outside of Chicago vying for a potential playoff spot. So Keep your eye on the AL Central. And Cleveland, you are not nearly as safe as you think you are. But if your offense keeps doing what it's doing, you can expect it to basically be like the Milwaukee Brewers and their National League counterpart. The offense keeps carrying them quite well. We'll just put it that way. Okay. That was a feisty pick, I would like to say, if I do say so myself, for the Cleveland Guardians to sit there. At number 15, you get to name who's right in the middle of it all for our vibe check this week, my friend.
Yeah, I think the middle is probably a good place for us to put the Baltimore Orioles.
Oh my God.
I gotta tell you, they only won 1 series over the last 4, and it was over Colorado. And, they should be really kicking it against the Yankees right now, and it just feels like there's so many missed opportunities. Like the Yankees have dropped some pretty gimme series here, but for Baltimore not to be able to finish off teams like Houston, sweet Colorado, manage a little bit better against a team like the Mets. All close games, that series against the Mets. And the Mets had a couple of big swings late in the game, and that's really what finished off. I mean, this is a good Baltimore bullpen, but it's definitely been showing its cracks of late. And obviously, the postseason is a sure thing for this Orioles team. It's about matchups. It's about will they win the division or not? Will they get that bye? Or are they going to be playing a wild card team that first week of October? And at this point, Warren, I have them ranked a little bit lower because I feel like it's slowly sliding in the wrong direction. Offensively, I think Santander and Gunnar Henderson have still been there. We've seen some drop-offs from some of the other guys. I think Rutschman has had a really tough go of it recently. Jackson Holiday, after rebounding a little bit well in his last few plate appearances, his batting average has dipped below 200. And just starting to see cracks, I'll say. Age from the season, you can call it, Warren. Lack of reinforcements due to the injuries that they have. This is a younger team we've talked about, and playoff success is going to be, very important to them, especially after last year. But we know that teams that have good playoff runs, usually September is very important and tells the story about how it goes. And I think for Baltimore, it's off to a rocky start.
Well, yet they find themselves in the division lead at this moment, which we'll talk on. We'll literally talk on that in just a minute. This is a very interesting point of today's vibe check because, yeah, of course, we are seeing precisely what we warned could be on the horizon for Baltimore in that they are comparatively inexperienced. They are comparatively young, and they could just be getting tired or a little unfocused on the rest of this regular season. Can we argue this feels like a team that's, well, what's the word I'm looking for? Load managing. If we speak NBA for a second, like a San Antonio team of years past might sit their Tim Duncans a little bit and their Tony Parkers and just wait for the playoffs to get there while they take a couple of extra L's. Baltimore should be taking the time to rest the pieces that need to be heavy hitters in the playoff push that's to come. Don't put too much pressure on your Adley Rutschmans. Let them be in a moment of inconsistency. Let it be under pressure. No pressure. No pressure. Just get through the rest of the season. Who cares where you're at? A first round bye could be great, but for a team like this, maybe it couldn't be. Right? We'll talk on that more when we discuss what the playoff brackets look like these days and how it seems to impact the mental game plan for each squad.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Warren. Like, what are you chasing here? What's your goal? Do you want to go deep in the postseason, or do you want a division title? Because, hey, you can get a division title, but you might run out of gas. And when postseason time comes around, and then those same Yankees might be the ones to knock you around. So is it really worth it, Settle for second place if you can get a postseason berth and go deep.
It's all about matchups. I mean, would you want one of those lower seeded wild cards? I mean, you can argue with Minnesota, Kansas City, Seattle, Boston, or Detroit. You do want to maybe face those to keep yourself sharp and get ready for the future rounds of playoffs. It's that kind of thing. So the vibes, I think, are being veiled as mediocre for a Baltimore squad that still finds itself in first place in its division. I think all of it is playing the game. They are officially in the game of postseason consideration, and they're already executing a certain amount of, we really don't care about the last 29 right at the moment. We just don't. Let's not pressure our team into believing they need to give everything they got to win these ones. Let's win what we can and give nothing back in the postseason. However, I'm going to also continue to thicken this plot because the only other mediocre team left to discuss this week is the team that Baltimore just overtook for the divisional lead out there in the American League East. That's right. The Yankees need to go next because they went 6-6. Okay. As far as my completed series count is concerned. I'm not sure what their current series is shaking out to look like. I'll let you point that out if you want. But at 6-6 over the last 4 completed series, New York is behind Baltimore again for a reason. Sure, they beat Cleveland 2 of 3. That's a big win. Their next series victory was against Colorado. Everybody should get one. And then Washington and St. Louis both took series from these Yankees. It could be very much a similar thing I just discussed. The mental game of what it's like for a team like the Yankees to be heading into postseason play and not wishing to put their pedal to the metal. Could be the exact same thing, but it could also be the Yankees having their own sources of instability we should call out right here, right now. Go ahead, Dan. You're the maestro. At number 14, just below the midway point, what's up with the Yankees? Why are they not leading the division against a Baltimore team, as you just admitted, is cooling off?
Yeah, they're all allowing a lot more runs, Warren, than they have up until this point. And the closer, Clay Holmes, has always been the strong point of the bullpen. You got guys like Luke Weaver and Mark Leiter Jr. in there, some talented names. But the problem has been the starters not getting through 7 on average. Garrett Cole has certainly improved from earlier in the year and has locked down, reestablished himself as the ace. But unfortunately, they have had a string of injuries that's kind of been a rotating 3, 4, 5 spots of that rotation. Luis Gill and Clark Schmidt are both coming back this week, Warren. So that's going to be kind of a huge boost to the rotation. Yeah, which is really not seeing the best year from like a Carlos Rodon. He's done a little bit better of late. Even a Marcus Stroman has had better numbers in the past. Nestor Cortez is starting to get up there into that over 30 age with the rest of them as well. So the pitching is showing the cracks. It's starting to show cracks for this Yankees team. Jazz has been such an excellent addition, probably performing at like his peak of his career. It's just a joy to watch.
I saw a tweet from a Mariners fan saying, "I'm so glad we got a Rosarena instead of Jazz Chisholm Jr. I hate making an impact on a lineup." You know what I mean? Like
honestly, and Jazz has been playing out of positions and bags like third base he's never played before, and stealing bags still at that high rate. He's up to 32 so far this year, and it's worth noting that the Yankees, Anthony Volpe has 26. Nobody else has more than 7. And actually, it's Aaron Judge with 7. Warren, so only with 5 bags this year, which is interesting. I wonder if that's something to look into. But obviously, the conversation shifts back to Aaron Judge and the MVP. He's at 51 home runs. Is he going to break his own record? Has he earned the MVP? I mean, Warren, he had a slow start to the year. So with that in mind, his 324 batting average and 706 slugging is insane. So in that terms of it, and I will say he has played pretty solid center field defense. Maybe not the shining we've seen him done in the outfield, but
he stayed healthy.
Exactly.
He stayed healthy.
Exactly. That's the big difference. So I don't know, Warren, is he your MVP guy this year? Because for me, I'm sticking, like I said earlier, it's Bobby Witt.
Bobby Witt is the most improved player, if there was an award, and I wish there was. Correct me if there isn't. But Bobby Witt's your most improved player. Arguably, Gunnar Henderson actually has a stake to that claim too, because he exploded this year in a major way. So both of those stocks went up tremendously. But Aaron Judge has just done too much offensively, right? He's hit 51 home runs, Dan. He's got a 9.4 WAR. I think Bobby Witt's was 8, if I'm not mistaken. And at the end of the day, I mean, you know that the biggest slugger in the league is usually your MVP. It takes an Ohtani-like performance to literally takes an Ohtani-like performance to dissuade you from that. So as much of a revelation and a wonderful rounding into form Bobby Witt has offered, it's got to be Judge all the way, with all due respect. And he's remained healthy enough that that's just not part of the conversation, right? He's played enough games. I mean, he's been the guy for New York, and we'll just leave it at that. I'm sorry.
I will also, Warren, I'll just say quickly that the deadline passed for teams to call up players. The Yankees chose not to call up Jason Dominguez, their hot outfielder, who we've already seen make an impact at the major league level.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, huh? Yeah.
That to me, Warren, is a call for defense and Alex Verdugo. Black aces are a thing, but the fact that this kid will not even be eligible for the postseason if it pops up where he is needed is unfortunate. So you just hope that an injury doesn't create that sort of situation. And yeah, the Yankees choosing to go for defense over offense is a little surprising to me with the amount of runs that they're giving up. And sure, Soto and Judge and like even Glaber has been great of late, but I don't know. I would want a little bit more than that. So kind of a surprising decision.
Interesting. Well, I'll be the other one. I told you before that I think of an American League outfield first in my mind is Judge, Soto, and Verdugo. So keep that stability, keep that unit. It makes sense. Jason Dominguez is not going anywhere,
Yeah, sure.
and let him incubate and let him be a part of a future push. Maybe it's a surprise you couldn't bring him in to do something else like a DH or something, just because he has been on fire enough, but they know what they're doing out in New York, or at least we know they think they do. So they probably just want to keep him, that being Jason Dominguez, they want to keep him stabilizing as much as humanly possible so he can be a real force next year. That's the only reason why I think certain prospects in my camp haven't been called up, guys who've been hitting 4 hits a game for the last week, if I look at my feed. So they must want to try to keep that person down there feeling great about themselves. So next year they get called up with a huge ball of confidence. That's probably what they're looking for. But hey, that's me playing devil's advocate to my own Dan Harrow, which is always fun. We don't get that opportunity much. Dan, here, let's point out that at this stage of the countdown, guys, we have nothing but winning teams left. Everybody else from here on out won at least 3 games more than they lost this week. Let's start with the defending champion, Texas Rangers, at number 13, the unlucky spot, because, boy, you want to talk about too little, too late. For me, that's the Texas Rangers. If you're going to have an 8-4 record this week, it's because other teams are letting them. It may be strength of schedule. Let's take a look, guys. First, they win 2 of 3 against Pittsburgh, strength of schedule. They then drop 2 of 3 to Cleveland. That's about fair, right? Obviously. A sweep of the White Sox. That's to be expected. And then a series win against Oakland. So, yeah, Texas gets to be up here probably off of strength of schedule. They'll get the Yankees, the Angels, and the Diamondbacks next, and 2 of 3 of those teams should handle them pretty appropriately. So we're really letting Texas feel good about themselves after a strong week, but they're 7 games under 500. They have a negative 49 run differential at my last count. This is not a team that is going to miraculously pull off a playoff run, is it?
Is it? No, it's probably not. And, you can only look at the injuries that this team has suffered, their entire starting rotation. Yeah, Warren, I know you're probably curious. No, Jacob deGrom has still not thrown a pitch this year. Sorry to say. And it's looking like, hey, maybe he'll be back next year. Max Scherzer is still dealing with arm fatigue.
Pause. Just because we've had such a nice conversation, I want to interrupt and say I don't give a darn about Jacob deGrom at this point. Like, he's not going to be the player that answers Texas Rangers' woes. And if I'm creating the seed for a cool storyline next year and he comes back completely killing it, then cool, fine. But I'm not convinced it matters at all. Are you?
No, but the financial investment in that guy who, you've had for 2 years, you've signed for another 3, and he's barely pitched, 10 games for you is, I don't know, kind of terrifying to me.
Stupid move. I mean, all we're doing is pointing out that Texas banked on last season and this season. And now what, dudes? Now what?
Yeah. It's not enough. And that's ultimately what it is. It's crazy at the start of this year. We were pretty confident that 3 teams could come out of this division as playoff caliber teams. And yes, the Central was better, as you alluded to, than we could have predicted. But the fact that now 1 will come out, and you got to think about, like, if the Angels are competing a little bit more in the future, how competitive this division really might be over these next couple of years. It could get very, very competitive. And that's what I'm going to chalk this up to when I look at the totality of Texas in this season. And it's very much an off year, very much a down year. I don't want this to taint us thinking next year that this is just going to be an average team, though. They could very much come back and be a very powerful, dominant team if their pitching gets healthy, if they make some good signings. Then they could very easily turn it around. So I think their record is a little bit worse than what we've seen. We've seen that with a winning record over the last 3 weeks here and a relatively easy schedule down the stretch. here. A lot of games against Oakland, against LA, Seattle. I mean, even winning a few of those could get them closer to 500. And I think
Yeah.
you got to chalk this year up to just injury and
Yeah. You want to have Evan Carter on the field with Josh Smith a little bit more. You want to have a healthy group of that young core that's so compelling and exciting about this squad. Josh Young is another one, obviously, who didn't get a ton to do this year with only 34 games under his belt. Josh Smith has been a revelation this year for them. He'll get to step into a pretty important role for the squad, and Wyatt Langford is bound to improve too. So, right. Injuries did ground what was a compelling core of young, capable players. I think of them as like the second most talented in terms of rookie field, only to Baltimore, of course, in the American League. So, like, this is truly a team that, you're right, can bounce back. But they've done too much to invest into a pitching collection that just may not pan out. And I worry for them on that standpoint. Their young guys will improve offensively, and they could be competitive and probably help churn out plenty of wins alongside superstars already established like Marcus Semien and Corey Seager. I get that. But in terms of adding more pieces through trade and such, they don't have a ton to play with, and their farm team's completely exhausted, right? This is going to be making the most of what they've already got and trying to ride that forward, not taking into account the adjustments that will be made against their various young pieces. Could be a slow upward climb is what I'm trying to allude to. You talk about how competitive this team can be in a couple, or this division can be in a couple of seasons. I'm a little biased when I say Houston's probably still super okay, though their farm team doesn't have a whole lot to call up as well. I'd like to say Seattle's stable, but we have tons of question marks still flourishing around our minds. The Angels do as well, and they're already trending more negatively than a Seattle camp is. I think we can objectively say that to be the case. You look at Oakland and the fact that they are the biggest question mark since the Montreal Expos, and we cannot possibly put any sort of barometer on what we can expect of them moving forward. The point I'm trying to make at this point, Dan, is it still feels like a Houston-Seattle 1-2 race for the next couple of years, with Texas doing their best to claw into that third spot. It's going to be about the health of that squad and their youth that determines it for me. But I don't give a darn about a DeGrom. And I do think they've invested so much in stabilizing a pitching rotation that doesn't have any guarantee it will be stable to begin with, Dan. That's all.
Definitely.
That's how I feel. Okay. Texas at unlucky number 13 can fade into the background. Number 12 falls to you, Dan the man. Who would you like to call out next?
All right. Well, still outside the top 10, but let's go ahead and do the Houston Astros, Warren.
Whoa! Okay. Wow.
Yep.
8-6.
And, virtue of their record, 4 series this past week, a series lost to Boston, split with Baltimore 2-2, a series lost to Philly. They only won 1 game in that one, and then a sweep of Kansas City. That's pretty huge, and that attributed to Kansas City's drop. But outside of that sweep, it was not the week that Houston would have wanted. They had a chance to build on their separation to Seattle, and they didn't. It's pretty much the same as what it was the last time we spoke, Warren.
That's a good point. That's a good point, especially for the part of me that wants any sort of hope to claw to for my team to figure this out. That sure. Houston's not a flame-throwing force as they have been rounding the bases towards past playoff brackets, right? This is a weaker version of Houston on paper, but I don't want to poke the bear anymore. You tell me, you're saying like, because they lose to Philly, fine. Because they lose to Boston, fine. And they can only manage a split with Baltimore. Maybe they're not as prepared for this playoff as we thought they'd be. It's just that 4-game sweep over Kansas City. I don't know if that's just Kansas City falling victim to their own personal vibes for a series, or maybe them wishing to face Houston instead of Seattle in a playoff. I don't know what that was about. That didn't go the way any of us expected. A 4-game sweep is just silly. I don't know, dude. I'm still afraid of Houston. I still respect them. Yordan Alvarez's 5.0 WAR is topping anything Seattle's thrown at them. I think 3.7 was Cal at the top of our team. So, they're outshining us there. Alex Bregman's been putting together his own 3 WAR season. Same can be said with Jeremy Pena, who's rounded into a solid form, not necessarily as a power bat, though he's hit 14 homers. More as just a contact guy who helps round the bases and pick up a formidable tally of RBI. He's just also great defensively as Jeremy Pena.
Yeah.
The team's just tough to beat. Jake Myers has had moments where he's been undeniable on with the bat in his hand, and King Tucker has been almost an afterthought with his 3.6 WAR too. So they're loaded offensively. It's just about the pitching, but it's rounded into form recently. Framber Valdez has been totally turning around his performance, right? And they're doing what Houston does. They figure it out when the fire gets hot. But
I will say, Warren, that since Kikuchi has joined the Astros, he's tweaked his style a little bit, and that's seen his ERA drop, which has helped a lot. And Verlander has been healthy for the last few starts. That kid Spencer Arrighetti, it came up earlier this year, continues to do really, really well. Even Hunter Brown has done well in the spot. So pitching continues to not disappoint. And even though like Kyle Tucker still being hurt is lacking on the depth side of things, I don't know if you saw, Warren, they signed Jason Hayward, who was one of the cut casualties from the Dodgers. So it's a little bit of extra experience off the bench. Yeah, the bats are definitely the weak side of it, but that might be like a difference maker if they're in the postseason, someone who's been there before.
Sure. I'm not worried. Houston's Houston. They're scary. They're better than us right now, and they can just keep being Houston, and they will be. So I just hope we catch them next year. It's just over and over again. Let's get them next year, sadly enough. But this was lower than I would have expected a Houston team to fall. How kind of you to suggest failure on them for not extending their lead over the Seattle Mariners more. And you're right. Yeah. Technically, that says that we could potentially catch them if they continue to play on this clip of mediocrity. It's just really hard when I see how poorly my own team has been playing. But we've been there. We've done that. Let's talk some trash about the Blue Jays, shall we? It's a little late, but they need to be outside the top 10. However, I mean, Vladimir Guerrero deserves to be given all the credit in the world for how quickly he's turned his season around into looking like the MVP that was. What does that say to you, Dan? What does that say to you with him playing as motivated as he is? I mean, they're outside of the playoff window enough or bubble enough to think that they truly are done all the same as I did before. Why is it now Vladimir Guerrero is popping off on this level? Is he trying to say, nope, don't break this up? Nope. Don't think we're done? Nope. We're sorry we took this year off, but we're still the core that can win in Toronto. What's going on?
I think it's a little less that, Warren. I honestly think it's a little bit more after the deadline passed. They had a clear opportunity to trade him, and they didn't. And there was probably a conversation of like, you're our guy. This is it. And maybe he kind of took that responsibility a little bit more on his own shoulders because his game has certainly picked up. His batting average is at 328 right now. He's picked up a large amount. And he's also taking the leadership role with some of the younger players on the team. And he is a younger player, right? But some of the players are even younger than he is. He's actually spending time with, and this is stuff you would have wanted to see earlier in the year when maybe he was inside his own head a little bit. It looks to me like he's really trying to build something, whether it's a repertoire with the team and some experience going into next year. It looks to me like he wants to stay, and he's beginning to build that case. Like, okay, you already know what I can do. Let me show you how I can lead. Let me show you what I can do for you if I continue to play here for the coming years. That means being the leader. That means being the clutch guy. That means being the one that the rest of the team is going to lean on a little bit more, not just the hot star like we've seen the last few years. So it's about, can you make that transition? Because if you can, we'll invest in you, we'll pay you. And I can kind of see him making those adjustments in his own, the way he carries himself and his game at the plate. And I think that goes a long way. I think that's really going a long way towards the entire team. Them being this high on the list more, and there's only been a few times they've been this high. And like you said, they're pretty much out of the playoff race, but they're still up here because they're winning games. And they're a tough out now against a lot of these teams. And I hate to say that because the Mets are going to be one of the teams they're coming up against here pretty soon. So hopefully, hopefully Vladdy
Yeah.
decides to cool off by that point. But no, it's encouraging to see. It kind of builds some optimism for next year.
Well, and you can argue that it's nice to see. There's still some question marks around the long-term thoughts of this team. I mean, you look at the legacies all over this camp that make them so much fun for many players to watch or many fans to watch, right? You like watching Toronto because you got Vladimir Guerrero's legacy, you got Bo Bichette's legacy, which is falling into the background compared to Dalton Varsho, son of former outfielder and manager Gary Varsho's legacy. Dalton's rounded into form as the true Robin to Vladimir's Batman, and even then has been Batman for this team several times throughout this year. And keep an eye on Spencer Horowitz. This guy, young rookie, playing 77 games for the Blue Jays, has contributed almost 1 WAR, but he's really rounding into form in late season too, trying to show that he could be a piece in the future for the Blue Jays. It's an interesting scenario. I want to speak a little bit on the disappointing aspect of that legacy discussion. You know, I'm building up to Bo Bichette, having only played 80 games this season and finding himself with a WAR of negative 0.3. Was this just a bad Bichette year? Will he bounce back?
Oh, that's a good call, Warren. And I think I want to say he'll bounce back because I've seen the player, and you want to think that. And I haven't seen anything that makes you think he can't make the adjustments necessary because he has. I start to worry about the development from an organizational standpoint with players like that when it almost looks like they hit a wall. Maybe they need another voice to kind of lead them in the right direction. Change this with your stance. Look at this way, and then maybe they're just not getting that. So my instinct is to not blame him, to blame the organization. However, if he changes organizations or if it happens again for multiple years, I think at that point you have to blame the players. So for once, for 1 year, I just call it a down year. Don't want to start placing blame just yet. But next year, when it becomes a trend, that's when you got to start to look at the player.
Bo Bichette plays shortstop. Seattle, I would take that gamble. Let's make that happen. Let's send Cool Hand Luke, Captain J.P. Crawford, over to Toronto and give me Bichette. I'd take that any day. I'm just saying. Because if you look at how a Kikuchi can go into a Houston organization and be augmented in that his pitching numbers can flip, as we see all the time, we think we know what a team is getting, but the team can change that player. And that is still potentially the case for Bo. Not that I'm saying the Seattle Mariners can be considered capable of taking a floundering hitter and turn them into a good hitter right now. We clearly can't claim that fame, but I'm just saying I'd take the bet. I would. Would other teams? We would find out if that's the case, if Toronto decides to move on from him. That will be interesting. But that's where we'll leave Toronto. Just outside the top 10. They are in the exact same position, by the way, as they were in our last show. They were number 11, then 2. So something brewing, and it's all Vlad, we might say. Yeah. Homeboy, who's number 10? Who's starting off the top 10 teams around the league?
Oh yeah. So we get to the top 10, Warren, and obviously we say it every time, right? All good teams. Got to be a few in here though that we have to pick on a little bit. The vibes are still good for this team, but for me, it's going to be the St. Louis Cardinals.
You've got to be extra disappointed in the team you chose to sprint ahead in the National League Central, but they remind me now of my Seattle Mariners, the National League version. That's all. They're very much around the same record, so couldn't help it but give you that parallel. And from there, please proceed and continue to elaborate.
Yeah, it feels a little just too little, too late for this team, and it's frustrating. This is a team that had several injured players, including a Jordan Walker, come back, and when they reached that roster crunch, which we've seen several teams do, and they were part of that 3-team trade for Tommy Pham, and they ended up cutting him.
Yeah,
he hasn't been as great, I will say. He's definitely struggled at the plate a little bit more so than he did with Chicago. But the player there, and I don't know how you invest into a trade and then just let him go like that. And then he goes to KC, and he's certainly going to go on a postseason run. So the word is that Tommy actually offered, basically said hey, if you cut me, I wouldn't hate a chance to go play for a playoff team, if we're not going to make it. And the Cardinals were like, okay, that's probably what we're going to do. So he kind of asked for that, and he kind of got what he wanted in that. But at the end of the day, it feels like the Cardinals are starting to put together a win streak here and there. It's just too little too late. They're going to finish out of the wild card race. They're in a division where they absolutely have a chance to contend, and they might not even finish ahead of the Cubs, who the Cubs just tripped over themselves so much this year and gave the Cardinals so much opportunity. And I know you were pretty hard on them from the start of the year, Warren. Probably still around expectations for them to finish where they are. I feel like there has to be some major changes this year. Obviously, Goldschmidt and Arenado, some of those deals are locked, but you need to maybe have a hard decision. Going into next year, you can't allow them to, and they have, I will say, both of them have gotten their batting averages up a little bit in the second half here, but it's just not enough. It's just not enough, and the division being as competitive as it is, this team needs some surgery going into next year, honestly.
The offensive ceiling wasn't quite what we hoped it would be, right? Is kind of the synopsis. You got to give I'm giving a ton of credit to Mason Wynn. I didn't even know who he was when the season started, and he has been their best player offensively. It's not even really been close. Brendan Donovan, to me, screams as a piece for the future for them still. Oh, no, this is, I think it's somebody else. Don't mind me. Alec Burleson, right? You look at this squad and they feel like the organization expects more from certain guys and just don't get it. Look down at the bottom of the WAR. You'll notice Dylan Carlson, right? One of those highly vaulted potential prospects now finds himself at Tampa Bay because they couldn't unlock his talent. He had given them only a -1 WAR to that point. And then there's a couple other compelling rookies that are trending in that direction enough that makes me wonder, are they just missing on what they think is quality talent like Victor Scott II and Jordan Walker? If they can't put it together, will they move on from them too? You're wasting your swings on some quality prospects and failing to develop them is what I'm noticing as a bit of a pattern there. Matt Carpenter may be the swan song worth acknowledging, that perhaps with just a 0.0 WAR contributed this year, he is in his final year of being a major league impact player, or name you see on the lineup sheet a lot. Though he only got to play, 50 games. And, Brandon Crawford too, my guy, is another one who was on this team who didn't do anything to make an impact. So there's a lot of whiffing, is what I'm saying. Whiffing on their decisions. To be fair, of all the garbage I spewed about Gibson and Lance Lynn, at least they did something for the team, right? Yeah. I mean, they pitched and stayed healthy and were around. And
well, Lance Lynn missed them off. But yeah, you're right. If anything, Steven Matz and Miles Mikolas were way more disappointing than what was expected. Even Kyle Gibson, I would say, made this rotation. Like Gray and Fetty have both been really good, but even Fetty hasn't been as good as what was expected. So it's just a lot of underperformances.
Oh, yeah. Fetty could have been really important for them to get into the positive momentum, and it didn't happen. And Miles Mikolas, I've been saying, is next for the Adam Wainwright-esque swan song, slow royalty wave. He shouldn't be pitching much longer for the squad at a major league level, personally. So yeah, lots of just whiffing on big decisions. And St. Louis, they've done it even more than say a Toronto did when you think about it that way. Very disappointing and surprising, even though they had a good week beating teams like Milwaukee, Minnesota, and the Yanks. They had a good week. It just does, as you said, feel like it's too little too late. Maybe in another week or two when we have our penultimate season discussion, we'll have something else to say about St. Louis, but they better get moving, or at least keep trending in the positive direction as they did this week, record-wise at 8-5. All right, Dan, an interesting choice for the top 10 team in the league. My turn. We'll flip over to another central team in the American League that may or may not just be catching the right amount of fire at the right time that could carry them into postseason consideration. They may be, quite frankly, getting discussed a little sooner than they should be, but I think it's the right time to highlight the storyline that is belonging to this week's 9-4 Detroit Tigers. Wow. The Tigers have turned it on My guy, Kerry Carpenter, who I've always had my eye on in Detroit since I've been paying attention to what they can do. And he's solidified his spot as a true major leaguer. But you also see Colt Keith improving at the plate. This is a hot team, my guy. Right now, Detroit went 9-4, dropped 2 to the Chicago Cubs, swept the White Sox, won a series against the Angels and against Boston to continue to say, nope, guess what? Everybody said we were just outside of the playoff bubble, but don't count us out. And now the storylines may be coming into fruition. What's your thought on the Tigers, if you have any at all?
Yeah, the actually getting more playing time to the younger players has been really beneficial.
Yep.
Javi Baez got hurt and is out for the year, which just opens up more playing time for more of these young guys, like you said, Warren. And yeah, like it's actually really encouraging. Even on the pitching side of things, they have 3 rookies that are in there. Ty Madden and Brant Herter actually did pretty decently through their first starts. So all alluding to them being even more competitive next year, getting more playing time in. Good signs, the stuff you want to see. And them getting hot at the end of this year, this is a team that really might cause some damage, Warren, down the stretch. I mean, a couple games against the Padres, some easy wins to get their momentum going after Oakland and Colorado. And who knows? Maybe if you get towards the end and beat Baltimore, KC, knock them down a peg. I think they have 2 series against Baltimore, so they can make an impact there.
So many young pieces to be interested in for years to come. Guys like Riley Green and Matt Vierling certainly have staked their claim all season long, playing over 100 games each. And Zach McKinstry, shortstop, has come in and played 97 games for them and contributing 1.1 WAR, taking over for Javier Baez, who rests at the basement of their WAR production, negative 1.2 across 80 games. I mean, Javier Baez is under contract a la Chris Bryant for way too long, right? So nothing they can do about that, but at least they can grow the young talent around him and still hope, cross your fingers, maybe Spencer Torkelson grows into an all-star caliber player like he was projected to be initially, though
yeah, he's still good.
He still could. He's still young enough. Parker Meadows has been another piece that's raised some eyebrows for this Tigers team. So yeah, the youth is working. Kudos to a coaching staff who's put it all together. And if they break into a wild card spot, it'll be really surprising from all of the ways Detroit has progressed through the season. But it is the buzzing storyline we need to pay a little bit of respect to at this stage of the season. Where will they be on our next recording? That's a real Detroit circled as a real team to watch between now and then for sure.
Definitely.
Yep. All right, Dan, we caught the tiger by the toe and now we let him go. We have only a couple more teams left to review. At number 8, I'm wondering who you got.
Yeah, for me, you won't be surprised, Warren. Let's do the Atlanta Braves.
You're right. I had a feeling the Braves belonged here in the mind of Mr. Dan Harrow. They did go 8-5, slightly less than what Detroit was able to put together this week. So do it, man. You know you love this part. Take center stage and point out why the big bad Braves rest behind some of the bigger names left on our panel.
Well, big series against Philadelphia, 4-game series where, they actually had 2 series against Philadelphia. They won the first one 2-1, and they lost one game to 3. So it's like a 3-4 split there, which if that's a 7-game series, that's a loss. And that's been kind of the story of this team, right? That we've talked about since the spring training. So, pitching staff is great. Their offense is definitely showing cracks, and some injuries to obviously Acuna, Riley, and Albies have all culminated in them basically chalking this year up to injuries. We're doing the best we can. So a division title is probably not in the cards, but a playoff spot's still right there. They're only a half game ahead of the Mets, and the Mets are pushing really hard to knock them out of it. That battle could come down to later in the season. The divisional matchup towards the end of this season might decide that. It's worth noting, though, Warren, I got to give the Braves credit. They have Ronaldo Lopez has been great. Spencer Schwellenbach is called up in place of Strider, and he's done excellent. He's basically starting a year before they thought he would have to, which is great. And then I think Chris Sale is the Cy Young Award winner this year. He certainly has all the metrics, 206 strikeouts and 160 innings to 129 hits, a 2.46 ERA. That's my vote if I had one more. And I don't know about you, but I think he's absolutely earned it.
You know, I'm going to let you know your Atlanta Braves a little bit better than me because I don't watch the team as closely as some of the others. Of course, being AL dub, it's kind of how it goes. But I got to throw some love to Marcell Ozuna for his phenomenal year. I'd be ashamed to see that get wasted by not making the playoff. But yeah, this team has basically been trying to fill in the sand as it falls out. You know what I mean? Of this scenario all year. It's admirable that they've cobbled together a team that can still make the playoffs. But I would be rooting, honestly, for other teams to bust into this opportunity like your blossoming Mets, right? Whom we've yet to discuss and will do shortly. I'm rooting for a new face to take Atlanta's spot, if I'm being honest, only for the differentiation, despite me just saying it's a bummer about Ozuna's production not getting to amount to playoffs. I do want to say at 0.5 WAR, we both can agree that former Met and former Mariner Jared Kelenic didn't do much to contribute to the forward momentum of this team, did he?
No, 13 home runs and basically a bench piece, even with the injured roster they have. Michael Harris came back, basically knocked him back onto the bench. Even Roman Laureano getting more playing time than him. I mean, he did get his batting average up a little bit, but yeah, he had an opportunity to shine. He did not take advantage of it. It's hard to say how many more opportunities like that he'll get.
Right. That's very true. Hey, this actually is a very strange Atlanta team where it feels like there should be a ton to talk about, but I think you hit every bullet we could. And hey, you're NL East Dan Harrow. So I'm going to trust you to have done a good job. And we'll move on into our next option. My turn. Running out of picks that appeal with all of these quality teams left, it's kind of hard to split some hairs and choose one over the other. Why don't I go with maybe a little bit of a disappointing team when you think about the fact that they were, that's right, our number one team last week at 8-5. This could be a good spot for the Arizona Diamondbacks, who, while still winning baseball games, didn't do so at quite a convincing clip as they did in our last discussion. They did sweep Miami. Everybody should. They swept Boston, 6-game win streak there. That's cool. But after that, the Mets cooled them down, and then the Dodgers, super important series, man. 4-game series, they could only win one of those 4. The second to last, which was a dominant win, 14-3, truthfully, but not necessarily looking good for a playoff series, to say the least, when you're not able to keep up so well with the team everyone's chasing. Right. What do you think about Arizona? We know how done they've been for you. I'm not going to reiterate that again. We've gotten there. We get it. But Arizona did win 8 out of their 13 games. They're still riding a winning trend. How much more stability might they be able to achieve before our next conversation, Dan?
Man, the injury to Ketel Marte is about as close to a dagger as you can get, Warren. And some good wins against teams that you got to have it, like Miami and Boston. But losing to teams like the Mets and the Dodgers, like the exact teams you'd be playing in the playoffs, like
yeah.
Man, it's so tough. I feel like
at least Corbin's waking up, though. I just have to say it. At least Corbin is starting to surge. If you got to lose Ketel, at least Corbin is taking the opportunity. But and for the record, Suarez is heating up too, contributing 2.2 WAR. But go ahead.
Suarez is, and like, how about Randall Grichuk? Ward, like, you got a few names in the system, but I just with the Corbin Carroll, like, he's only second year. You can't blame him a lot, but man, his slump was so poorly timed, and it's great he's breaking out of it now. But it's just more of these "is it too little, too late" kind of feelings, and the pitching staff has just continues, I should say, to be relatively anonymous. Nobody really taking control. Zach Gallen and Ryan Nelson being relatively okay, and yeah, like I think I was kind of surprised the Mets beat up on some of these starters that we didn't really expect them to, and that's been the story. Some really crushing losses at home for this
Mm.
Arizona team that you wouldn't expect. And yeah, I am rooting against Arizona right now, obviously for my own selfish reasons. But I could say that as recently as 2 weeks ago, this team had a serious case to leapfrog the Padres for that top wild card spot. And now I think that they should be really worried about the Braves because, as far as I'm concerned, the Mets are entering that race, and the Diamondbacks and the Braves might well be those two teams on the outside fighting for that third wild card spot. That might be where they end up.
I have, because of researching here, realized that Josh Bell did go to this Arizona Diamondbacks team and has played 29 games for them and provided .3 WAR. So forgive us for missing that earlier. Josh Bell does play for the Diamondbacks now. Also, Luis Guillorme was picked up by the Diamondbacks following his release at the hands of the Angels, and in his 10 games has contributed .3 WAR, meaning he's doing something. The reason why I'm bringing these up, Dan, is I'm thinking of the answer. I'm thinking of the answer to the fact that you're absolutely right. Ketel Marte's gone down. Who fills that void? You know, you've got Geraldo Perdomo probably maybe slotting in there. He's contributed 3.0 WAR. I've liked Blaze Alexander, if you recall him having a really interesting couple of weeks here or there, or Kevin Newman is a shortstop on their bench that may fill a void too, who's contributed his own 2.2 WAR. Point being is that Ketel Marte is a loss. There's absolutely zero doubt about that. But with the burgeoning Corbin Carroll and the pieces I just kind of listed, they may have enough to cobble together what they'll need from his output, as long as the rest of the camp remains healthy.
Yeah.
It's pitching wise, the pitching has been almost a non-conversational factor for you and I this entire year. At least in my estimation, we just haven't talked a ton about the Brandon Fats or the Ryan Nelsons. They are over four. They are at over 4 ERA each, so it's not like they have been a big factor. Jordan Montgomery, of course, has been phenomenally disappointing with a 6.26
Yeah, he's in the bullpen
ERA.
now.
Exactly. I mean, talk about what's his name? Talk about his manager, right?
He came
Takes
out hard against Scott Boras too. I don't know if you saw, but he flat out came out and said like he totally screwed me. And some other players came out and defended Boras after that. But I think that's exactly what we talked about way earlier when it was all still happening. And that's clearly Jordan Montgomery's a fan because he feels the same way.
Dude, not a good look for Montgomery as he gets ready to potentially move on to another contract, right? It was just a 1-year deal.
He hopes.
Yeah, exactly. He may, I mean, a 6.26 and a bad attitude is kind of tough to be excited about right now. And then Zach Gallen has been the guy at 3.87, but having only been able to pitch in 23 games. So I feel like that's where quietly they've had the least interesting developments is around the mound. But the offense has been able to buoy that, especially in recent games. What is the deal with Jordan Lawler, dude? Just before we move on from this team, I'm getting myself more immersed in trading card hobby, and Jordan Lawler cards are absolutely everywhere, and he's treated like, you know, a top tier prospect like a Carlson or a Cruz, a Dylan Cruz kind of type.
Yes.
Well, how come this guy hasn't manifested if you have anything to shoot at? And if not, just be like, hey, you just not that good.
I feel like he's one of those highly touted prospects for the last few years. I don't know if he hasn't been given an opportunity. I couldn't even tell you if he came up and didn't do anything. But I know he's played in the majors. I think he was with the team last year, and I know he's had his moments. But I think it's one of those like, oh, grab his card because he's going to be something, and he hasn't turned into it yet. But he was one of those hype machines, like probably a first-round pick.
Yeah, like in a world where Dylan Cruz gets a call up or a Yason Dominguez is left off the frickin' playoff squad for New York, you know, it just seems like Jordan Lawler's cards are everywhere, and I'm not sure why. Thanks for that moment on the hobby, guys. We'll move on into our next team, I promise. Dan, that's your choice. We're now hitting our risers. The top 6 teams in baseball are nigh. Who's kicking it off first?
Yeah, some of the vibes are shaky here, more and especially recently for the Philadelphia Phillies.
Woo, but this is easily the highest they've been in a couple of weeks. You were relishing putting them in our 20s for a while there.
You're right. They were struggling. They've definitely found themselves a little bit more. Their rotation has kind of been rotating that that fifth starter in and out. Spencer Turnbull's currently hurt and is probably not going to be back in time for the postseason. So it's kind of a rotation and it's stretched on the bullpen a little bit more. But the bullpen's been very strong. The Phillies have locked down a lot of series that they had to. They did lose that first one to Atlanta, which we already mentioned, but then they won a series against KC and Houston before taking 3 games to 1 over Atlanta again. And, Lauren, this team, we've talked about it before. It's just about their going into the postseason, and we want to see them winning against the teams that they will be seeing in the postseason. They've done that. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they've been just as hot and cold as ever, and that includes Bryce Harper, who has been very good consistently over the season, but he just goes into these slumps and the team follows him. And I've watched a lot of this team over the last couple of years now.
Sure you have, yeah.
And it's just the slumps are just killers, especially from the bottom of the order. When you got like Real Muto and Marsh not hitting like they have not been recently, you could throw Austin Hayes in there too, since he's been a regular in the lineup. It really drags the team down. And the thing that with Harper is concerning is his power is I don't want to say dropping off a cliff, but he's at 26 home runs, which still leads the team, is still really good. But his slugging percentage.
Schwarber's got 32. Love you, buddy.
Oh, you're right. Harper has 26 home runs, and his slugging percentage is at a 521, which is a little bit below his career average. So there's a concern that the power is starting to drop. Harper was hit by a pitch today, Warren, left the game. So there is concern. If he's not in the lineup, like an Edmundo Sosa moves in, like maybe Johan Rojas, and there's not a lot of other really strong options for you. So that would be very concerning for the Phillies down the stretch here, especially with a lot of divisional games against the Mets and the Braves. The division isn't wrapped up yet, and the Braves are certainly motivated to chase down the Phillies.
Ooh, you're right. And I love the whole point out that where this player goes, we go. I totally endorse that with your star player, and certainly that's what Harper is by reputation for the Philadelphia Phillies, not either producing in a consistent and trustworthy clip, also taking that potential injury, regardless of how small it is. The vibes are fragile for a Phillies team that doesn't want any fragility whatsoever. I've mentioned in past weeks and months that this is the most stable team in baseball to me, but you're suggesting precisely the kind of Achilles heel that can prove them vulnerable still. You can't quite, when you think about how the streakiness took them out last year, they've done nothing truthfully to address that if Harper's still the heart and soul and spirit of that trend. So yikes is right. It's not as ironclad as it could be, which is why you're kind of hoping, I'm sure you are, especially with the Atlanta Braves and the Phillies showing those vulnerabilities, you're hoping that you can stay hot out in New York.
Yes,
well,
me too.
We'll leave that for a couple more teams down the line, or maybe the next one. The Phillies still seem like a tough out, but they always have been. You're doing a good job of planting the seeds that suggest they haven't done enough to cut what could be their biggest challenge come playoff time once again. So I'm a little nervous for them all over again. Who to go to from here? Only real strong teams left. I guess the most losses in the loss column need to be reflected here. Let's go with the San Diego Padres for number 5. They did go 8-6, only took 2 steps forward, which at this stage of the game is still forward and very important, but you would have liked more. Let's break it down. They took 2 of 3 from Minnesota. They split against the Mets, and that's a pretty important matchup. I'm sure you'll want to give some more light to. They split against St. Louis as well in a 4-game set, and that's a bit surprising since St. Louis remains on the bubble. And then they did beat Tampa Bay 2 out of 3 to make sure they stayed on par with their American League dominance. They get ready for Detroit next, though. We'll see if that continues. San Francisco after to lick some wounds, and then 2 quick games with Seattle. We got to expect San Diego to come out looking pretty good after clips like that. But at 8-6, they were truthfully only mediocre this week. What do you think on San Diego?
Yeah, kind of a again opportunity to make up ground on the Dodgers, and they've certainly gotten a little closer, and they've jumped over the Diamondbacks to solidify that second place in the division. But they'd really have to go perfect the rest of the way. It's possible, it's just not very likely, unfortunately, anymore, especially with the way the
Mm-hmm.
Dodgers have been playing. So the Padres beat the Dodgers in the season series. You know, they've been had a really good record against their own division. The Mets actually took the season series in that split with the Padres. So technically, we have a tiebreaker with them if it comes down
Mm.
to that. But I do
Okay.
think they will retain the first wild card as they have it now. And, you know, we'll talk about seeding and stuff next week when we have more of a picture. But it's really about the health of the team. So we just said Tatis come back and start to ramp himself up this month before going into the playoff run. And Yu
Mm-hmm.
Darvish has rejoined the team after being absent for quite a while, which is good timing along with Joe Musgrove starting to hit his stride right now. The rotation is going to be a lot more solid.
Yep.
So haven't had any issues with the bullpen. This just solidifies that since the trade deadline. All his acquisitions have done really, really well. And yeah, Warren, I think, you know, right to have this team here probably could have been a little bit higher if they had taken advantage and made up more ground over the Dodgers, but still in a very good position going towards the postseason.
Let's just do one thing and say Jackson frickin' Merrill, huh? Who
Yeah,
had him? Who had
right.
Jackson Merrill being the answer? Alongside Jerks and Profar, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
Those guys have combined for 6.5 WAR this season, and Merrill's at the head of it. They have been revelations for a squad that needed a Hassan Kim and a Fernando Tatis and a Manny Machado to be themselves. But
right.
nobody, I think, had it on their bingo card that Profar and Merrill would be maybe the more valuable pieces as we head into the final stretches. And that's what's put Padres over the top. We've got people close to sports around me saying things like they've got the team that they need to win the World Series with, especially with pitching starting to solidify right when it counts. I
Right.
think it's time to put San Diego in the top shelf of contenders in the National League. Mention them perhaps taking the spot of Atlanta in that same conversation you and I started the season off with, where it was like, it's Atlanta, it's Philadelphia, it's Los Angeles, and then everybody else. Could be that San Diego truly deserves to be among that named group. So it's exciting to see. I'm grateful because we both were kind of arguing over where San Diego might land. I had them busting into the playoffs. You had them continuing a downward trend that seemed to be kicked off by shipping out Juan Soto and instead settling for the various prospects and, Michael Kings and such that they got back. Well, San Diego's turned it into a winning formula for the moment. And I can't say anything but congratulations to the Padres. Get ready
Yeah.
for playoff baseball. You're the only pro sports team out in a beautiful city in San Diego. I hope you show up and cheer for your squad. That's what I want to see. Padres sitting at number 5 seems fair, and the last 4 teams here are all, gosh, inspiring. We got a couple of NL Central teams, guys. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We got my co-host's favorite squad. Could they return to number one more time? Oh, and then we've got those Doyers. When we take a look at the records, Dan, I am going to give you your own grace period. I'll do you a solid. How about Milwaukee sits at number 4? Yet another top 5
I think that was
consideration
my pick,
team.
Warren.
What's that?
I think that was my pick.
Was it?
I think so, yes.
Classic Warren doing classic Warren stuff.
And I am gonna change it. I'm sorry, because that is a good pick, but I gotta jump on my own grenade here, Ward. And I
Oh,
gotta
okay.
get I think it's about time that we went ahead and got the Mets out of the way. I appreciate you trying to give me a little bit more life there, but you know, they lost they lost a little bit more than I would have liked over this previous stretch. So
Fine. Have it. The New York Mets sit at number 4. Dry your tears. Tell me why.
yeah, well, listen, it's good baseball, and happy to see them up this high. Just a
Dude, 10
good.
games over 500. I'm
I
jelly.
know, never would have guessed it honestly earlier this year.
Right.
I alluded to at the start of our conversation about the changing in pitching philosophies. The Mets
Yes.
don't use the fastball more than they have to, and they've been getting really good results from their top three of Severino, Manaya, and Quintana. Quintana's been a little bit more shaky recently. We were forced to, because of Senga's continued struggles, forced to
Mhm.
call up Tyler McGill, Tybor, who has kind of struggled. He's not really
Yeah.
a normal starter for us. He's a fill-in guy, so nothing too surprising there. But David Peterson, who has struggled earlier this year, came back, and he's actually been excellent for the Mets, Warren. He's really helped solidify the rotation in a way that we expected Kodai Senga to.
Okay.
And that McGill role is currently he's in there because Paul Blackburn is still currently hurt. He got hit in the
Mhm.
hand with a pitch, so he should be back hopefully sometime in the next few weeks. And Kodai Senga, while he might not be ready to go by postseason, he's actually exploring if he can at least get his innings up to the point where he can come out of the bullpen and help out in that way, which would be a huge
Ooh.
help for the team if Blackburn is healthy and we have our five starters. So
Mhm.
pretty encouraging stuff from that side of things. The bullpen has been much improved. Danny Young, Reed Garrett, and Phil Maton have all been really good for us recently. Danny Young was good earlier this year, but he was hurt. So you're
Yeah.
hearing all the things you want to hear on that side of the thing. JD Martinez was just put on paternity leave. He'll be back soon, but DJ Stewart actually came back and got a hit in his first at bat, which is super encouraging for our depth. And, there is a conversation happening in New York about Francisco Lindor, where he's on a 26-game hit streak. He is up to 30 home runs and 26 stolen bases.
Yep.
His batting average was sub 200 for the first 2 months of the season. He's now got it up to 273 and rising, 500 slugging.
Wow.
Warren, I know this is going to sound crazy, but there's sports writers in New York that are making a case for Francisco Lindor to be the NL MVP, which
Mhm.
is kind of insane. Like, he's certainly playing well enough for it, but for it to be anyone except
But
Otani is
yeah,
nuts to me. he,
sure.
they're literally making the case for him, being like, well, Otani's not playing defense this year, and Lindor's doing it offensively and defensively. And I'm like, just stop.
Yeah, I'm with you. Just stop. No, I love that anybody could hold a candle to Otani's prospective MVP award, but the truth is that it's like trying to say Bobby Witt Jr. or Gunnar Henderson is going to be the MVP of the American League, barring injury, of course. It's just sure those players exploded as you can say Francisco Lindor has exploded into
Yeah,
guiding the Mets into a winning trajectory. But the truth is Shohei's Shohei, and we can stop right there. But congratulations on finding the answer. When you look at this squad, you look at Francisco Lindor's charisma and his ability to attract talent to him, and you had to hope that if New York was going to be a playoff team, it began and ended with him. And
right.
he's been the core. He's been what I mean. Who are we just comparing this situation to? Bryce Harper being the guy. Well, Lindor's the guy for the Mets,
Yeah.
and it's exciting stuff. Now, what has this done? And you know where I'm going with this, just because I'm going to ask this kind of pregnant question we've had all year. What's this do for the Pete Alonso outlook, where the team is headed right now, and the fact that it's been Lindor, not Alonso, who's been the focal point of the positive trend? I know Alonso has hit his 31 homers. Please don't get me wrong. I would have to think they'd continue to want to keep these players together, and he would want to continue to stay. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would want Alonso to stay for sure. Always said that. He was
Yep.
definitely struggling at points this year, and he's kind of turned it around. And I think now, after 5 years, we've reached a point where we can rely on Pete's power. His defense is much improved. His batting average is better, but he just can't consistently like hit 300 for a season. I know a lot of players can't do that, but I kind
Right.
of like to see him get his batting average a little bit higher more consistently. If he were to go, there are other players we could move around in our infield. We could still be a good competitive team. Replacing his power would be the hardest thing. And for that
Mhm.
alone, I think it'd be worth trying to resign him. And I think the Mets are going to make every effort to resign him. This winning stretch is going to help that. A postseason run will help that. As much as Pete has had a good year, I think he is not going to get as high a number as he thinks he is. I don't think he's proven himself this year to be one of the best first basemen in the league. Maybe
Mhm.
he's obviously in the top 10, but I just don't think he's going to get top 5 money. I just don't think it's going to happen. So if that means he's willing to take less to stay with the Mets, then hopefully that's the way it goes. But I don't know, the way he's talked all year, and Boris being his agent, I just feel like he is going to go into free agency and take the highest offer. That doesn't mean the Mets won't make that highest offer, but I feel like that's his perspective. So half of me is preparing for that, and I would hate to see it. But the fact that a deal is not done already and he's having a relatively good season means he might want to just bet on himself.
True. Now, Mark Vientos has been one of those new pieces to your team, playing at third base and contributing to 2.8 WAR that actually eclipses Pete Alonso's 2.3. Is there any hope that Vientos can be turned into the first baseman of the future? Because I know, just from my own noticing of trends, that if a third baseman has any reliable secondary position on the diamond, it's usually first. What are your thoughts there?
Definitely, and he played a little bit of first this year, so he definitely could. And he's back. He's in third right now in place of Brett Batty, who's still in the minors, but certainly could kick it at third base on a pro team. So we could definitely make that move without necessarily losing a whole lot. So yeah, there are options there, and that's why I don't think the Mets will overpay for him. And even we signed Jose Iglesias as a free agent, and he's just been a utility infielder, and he's hitting 310. He's been excellent. So, opportunities like that, the Mets don't want to close the door on by locking it in. So we'll see what happens with Pete. I think at this point, we have most of the team under contract for next year, except guys like Marte and Winker and probably McNeil. So if Alonso were to come back, it might mean we bring a lot of these guys back. But I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not yet, Warren. We'll see how the season ends before we decide if we want that or not.
Oh, and it's amazing how up in the air even your thoughts on your +10 Mets still are. Isn't it amazing? Baseball's crazy. You can have such a strong shot at a playoff and still wonder, is this really the team I want next year? Crazy. Right. But Francisco Lindor had better be a part of it. That's where we can leave your New York Mets for now. And at the 4th position, it's a strong spot. But, dude, I will now move us into the Milwaukee Brewers at number 3, who continue to use their amazing offense to buoy themselves into a stable place atop the NL Central. Can you think of no team that has been more shockingly capable? Maybe Cleveland, but is that a shocker when you've got a Jose Ramirez? Hard to say. But we've seen this squad rally around your William Contrerases and your Willy Adameses, who, by the way, I shared that stat with you. We should say it on air. Guys, Willy Adames has like 13 3-run homers, which eclipses the entire totals of several Major League Baseball teams throughout the entire season. I know I said that fast. So Willy Adames has hit 13 3-run homers, and there are entire baseball teams who have had hit 12 or less, okay? That's what's crazy about the clutch factor of Willy Adames at the plate, and he's not even the guy. William Contreras has a 3.8 WAR, but he's not even the guy. Jackson Chourio is just his fellow Jackson Merrill, away from a Rookie of the Year victory in the National League, but with his 3.7 WAR, Jackson Chourio is not the guy. Guess who's leading that team in WAR, unless you already looked, my guy. Guess who's leading the team, Milwaukee Brewers, in WAR? You looked, didn't you? Your cable came loose too. My friend, it's with 4.4, it's Bryce Terrain. Bryce Terrain is the guy. Wow. And it's cool. There you go. I heard you. We have his stolen bases making an impact. We have his capable contact hitting, filling in that, Luis Arias-like role that we love so much. Contact hitters are just as important as sluggers sometimes. There's just been so many ways the offense can counter. And I'm not talking about yet the Christian Yelich contributions earlier in the year or the Sal Frelick 1.9 WAR that continues to be important for the squad. It's just been amazing to watch the offense buoy every pitching challenge they can have. But how's the pitching looking? Well, I mean, at the moment, they still have several of their starters capable of carrying a decent sub-4 WAR, like Colin Ray with 26 starts and Freddie Peralta 23 starts, excuse me. Freddie Peralta with his 28 starts contributing to 3.75 ERA. Frankie Montes is on this team and in his 6 starts has contributed 3.82. Like, they're not necessarily the best ERAs in the world, but the offense is good enough to eclipse those failures. Dan, Milwaukee, can they do it? Can they do it? Can they go all the way is the question I have to ask you at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, they got a little bit of injuries, like guys like Wade Miley and Brandon Woodruff are still hurt. Christian Yelich just hurt. So I just think about like what they could have been, but they are still a really talented team. And, Jackson Churio, like I remember everyone talking about to be excited for Jackson Holiday. And we were very much under the radar on these other Jacksons. But Churio has been unreal. He has 20 stolen bags and 19 home runs in his rookie year. Kid's still 20 years old. 2 grand slams already, Warren. It's insane. Guys wait their whole career for a chance. And obviously, Willie Adames is going to be the top free agent shortstop next year, no doubt about it. So that, and I look at their bullpen, which is much improved to where it was, and part of it is because of their improved starting pitching. Like, I remember when we started the year, Ward, and Joe Ross and DL Hall were starters for this team. Now they're bullpen arms that are effectively getting to Devin Williams. So this team definitely has the pieces to go on a run. I don't know that they'll get a bye necessarily, and it does make me nervous when it gets to matchups, but I think they have the ability to go deep into this postseason.
And they
certainly have the offense.
They did it without Craig Counsell. Talk about another storyline we had earlier on in the year that we thought would pay major dividends. And now look what's happening. Very interesting. However, Craig Counsell has had a hand in the rest of our countdown, to say the least. And with only 2 teams left, you kind of know where we're going with that. But Dan, the second team is yours. I'm challenged to talk about the number 1 team in the league, whomever you choose. I'm curious who you're going to make me talk about. Who's next at number 2?
Yeah, 2 great teams, right? And 2 fantastic records for me. And it could go either way, Warren. It's not about forcing you one way or another. Just off of vibes, I am going to have to put the Chicago Cubs here, because the question comes up of, is it too little too late? Is there enough time left? This is another one where after their last 2, they're in a 6-game winning streak, we should say. We're in a sweep of Pittsburgh and a sweep of Washington, some easier teams, but it just gets the vibes in the right place, right? And when you look at their schedule the rest of the way, some tough series. They got the Yankees and the Dodgers, but then they've got the Rockies, they've got the A's, they've got Washington, and then back up we got Phillies and the Reds to close it out. So it's very possible they can do a winning record the rest of the way there. And they are the team closest behind the Mets at 4.5 games back in the wild card. So it's very possible for them to jump back into that conversation if the Mets fall on their face, and so does another team. I still feel like this is a team that just obviously had more expectations at the start of the year, even though they're playing so well now, Warren. And this is why I think the vibes are partially off, is we all saw 4 months of inconsistency from this Cubs team. We saw the ceiling, but we also saw the basement. And I think we know that this is probably not a strong playoff team. Their bottom of the order is very weak. Armstrong's been a little bit better, but he hasn't been a good, consistent hitter. Amaya is another one who has not done super well. And, Cody Bellinger, I saw this whole thing, Warren, about how Bellinger has kind of reshaped his swing with 2 strikes. He's almost a better hitter with 2 strikes than without, which is great, but it's just not enough. It's a whole season of just not being enough. And, even though the Cubs have on this great little run recently here, I'm still left with kind of disappointment from what they could have been.
Oh, man. Interesting. I'm going to ride the optimism because, I picked this team to win this division, so I might as well encourage them to bust into a playoff bracket. I know that means it could be at the expense of the Mets. Nothing personal, but I'm going to go ahead and say how possible it can be, because we've yet to see Isaac Paredes flourish with this group at all. He's only he hasn't contributed a point of WAR or even a segment of one to this point in the year. With the camp. I mean, Christian Betancourt has come in and has developed 1 point of WAR in his first 13 games with this group. Pete Crow Armstrong has a 1.9, and yeah, it's like feast or famine. He's either doing something memorably awesome or he's invisible, and I get that. But there's plenty of reason to think the offense can continue to drip wins into the column for them because they're figuring it out right this second, and their schedule. I don't know if you heard yourself when you said all those teams are getting ready to play, but outside the Yankees and the Dodgers in the next couple of series, they sound like they, as you said, can win plenty of games down the stretch. It's just a matter if the others can too. Shota Imanaga has earned that all-star nod. Jameson Tylon is fantastic as the veteran thorn in everyone's side still. Justin Steele, after coming back, has remained healthy and kept his WAR just a shade above 3. And that, or not WAR, but ERA, excuse me, guys. And then Javier Assad, I keep on talking about, might be my favorite and vastly overlooked member of this camp. It's just that fifth starter might be the biggest question mark, if I can suggest that to be the case. And it could very well be what separates them from a playoff berth compared to everybody else's momentum. But you have to give some love. This is easily the highest the Cubs have been in our countdown the entirety of the year. And I'm happy for them to see them go 10-2 and crush their way into a positive record. They're better than the Mariners now. When you look at it that way, it's pretty easy to say, look how far we've come, right? So kudos to Chicago. They still have a puncher's chance, and it could very well happen. We'll see where they sit in the next show. It's going to truthfully could be one way or the other. It really does feel like to me. So that means, Dan, you've left me the guys, the Doyers, to discuss as our number one team in baseball. And it's
all you.
It's all me. You can help, but it's undeniable. It's undeniable. They still did lose more games over the last week than the Cubs that we just broke down, but they had the same number of wins, so 10-3. Teoscar Hernandez sits at 4th in the league in strikeouts, just to get that trend out of the way, guys. He's got 161 from my last count. And no Mariners have struck out more than Teoscar at this point, not even my beloved Big Dumper. But he still contributes to a far better lineup than my Seattle Mariners. And I'm not surprised, guys. It's all about Mookie. It's all about Ohtani. It's all about Freeman. Those guys have been phenomenal, crushing this lineup towards success almost at whim. And if they have a bad day, so does the rest of the team, one would say. But every time they have a good day, it's usually a Dodgers W. They swept Seattle. They got 2 of 3 from the Rays, 2 of 3 from Baltimore. That's a big one in a potential World Series preview. And then 3 of 4 against Arizona in what is certainly a potential National League Conference Series preview once again. So you have to think the Dodgers are putting it all together at the right time in the right place. Outside of the 3 I just mentioned, Teoscar really is the biggest contributor at 3.4 WAR. Will Smith has done 3 as well. He's his own all-star caliber player. I think last week I suggested that Miguel Rojas got traded away from the Dodgers, but no, he's still with this team. I was getting my Vargases and my Rojases mixed up, so I'm sorry. But you got to love that Miguel Rojas gets to be on a lineup like this. He's probably the least remarkable player of the group, unless you count Max Muncy, who's getting up there in age, but even he's contributed as 1.8. Kike has been helpful with this lineup too, though only just at a 1.9 WAR. And that's pretty much where your contributors stop. You got to think maybe Andy Pages has been an interesting developing talent as the year has gone on. And Tommy Edman joining this team gives them plenty of potential ways to get around any speed bumps they may hit injury-wise. This is just a loaded squad, Dan. The Dodgers have been and will be. And I haven't even talked about the pitching end. Do you want to do that for me, or should I continue to hem and haw?
Oh, dude, I could take it for you, man, because of the new addition. Jack Flaherty's been excellent with them. It's unreal. Of course, Walker and Bobby have been healthy, and Gavin Stone has brought his numbers down a little bit. It has been a little bit more heavy leaning on the bullpen beyond that, though, with guys like Peterson and Grove getting a bunch more innings to try and get them to the closers. Obviously, Glasnow still hurt. Recently, Clayton Kershaw was put back on the injured list. Yamamoto, I haven't heard anything more, and I don't know if you have, but I think there's still word that he could be back, but there's no guarantees.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that we're going to see Clayton Kershaw for the playoffs. If we do, it'll probably be in a bullpen role. So, and Joe Kelly was recently put on the IL, which hurts their bullpen chances. So, not getting any better, but I wouldn't be surprised 3 weeks from now to see a bunch of these guys come back healthy because the Dodgers usually try and make it work that way.
Yep. And they've been playing with house.
Sorry, I was just also going to say Freddie Freeman returned with still having a broken finger and hit 2 home runs, which is just unreal.
How Freeman of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just this team messes around and might win the World Series. You know, we've talked about all year the fact that this isn't their final form. Next year they'll have an Ohtani arm to benefit from, at least theoretically, and theoretically it'll be good still. But you know, it's an amazing thing to see what has swelled out of the Los Angeles Dodgers organization. And truth be told, especially with all the vibes around town, this should be the team at the top of the pack. Any other result seems a little unnecessary. This really needs to be the team that looks the best because they came into the season uncrowned champions in so many people's minds. And now they're where they need to be in order for the prophecy to potentially come true. The fun part when we get to the bracket will be, can anyone stop the Dodgers in the National League? And can anyone in the American League stand up to them?
And it'll probably be, if it goes like it is, Arizona will play San Diego. So whoever wins that will probably play the Dodgers out of the bye.
Fire.
And if I say that's the Padres, again, like we mentioned, the Padres do have the Dodgers in the season series. So, man, that it would be unreal. But if the Dodgers win that, it's hard to think of a team that could stop them.
It's exciting stuff. The National League is coming into form. The right teams, I think, rose to the cream of the crop this week. You know, barring maybe Chicago's surprise in our top 3, the right teams are winning baseball right now to prove what our playoff bracket truly will look like here in the next couple of weeks. But so much could happen. Did we get our numbers right, guys? If you want to leave us any feedback, please do so. Give us a courtesy email to coveringourbases@gmail.com. We love all the feedback. We want to make the show better. Let us know what's working and not working as we get ready to round our own bases into season 2. Of course, we'll still have coverage over the off season, but we may even dabble in other sports. Dan has suggested we don't have to just cover our bases. We could cover other bases too, but we'll see what that means down the line. We prefer baseball coverage, but let us know in the comments below if you agree that at number 30, the Chicago White Sox are the worst team in Major League Baseball history. Or are they not going to catch the Mets and leave that distinction still to my co-host's organization? How about let us know in the comments below if at number 15, the Baltimore Orioles are getting put there by Dan more than they ever should have been. He's like loving putting Baltimore at 15, guys. Trust me, they're still one of the best teams in baseball. Let us know how you feel so down in the comments below, and make sure to make fun of Dan. And speaking of making fun of Dan, at number 10, let me know if the St. Louis Cardinals have missed the boat on the playoffs. You know, that team that he picked to win the National League Central. Ho hum. San Diego Padres. Hey, let me know at number 5 if I was the smartest man alive when I said they would make the playoffs instead. And finally, let me know in the comments below if at number 1, I'm a jerk for being so mean to Dan. And when the Dodgers swept the Seattle Mariners, I got exactly what I deserved. That is what I'll leave you with. It's been a blast of a vibe check. Once again, my guy, thanks for the great conversation. Before we go, do you have anything for our adoring fans?
Excited for the end of the year. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Some really good matchups as we get to the end. And, you know, that last 2-3 days of the regular season is always some things decided. So it'll be exciting to see how the seeds stack up. And then we can finally get into the postseason, Warren.
Dude, so many storylines have come and developed and stepped back. I have to say, our early season predictions don't make me feel. I don't feel like we're super stupid. Like we did a good job. I'm kind of proud of us. If anything, I'm grateful your Mets are going to be overachieving compared to where we did put them earlier in the year. And my Mariners disappointing me. I mean, it's just more of the same. So can I really be that shocked? But hey, You guys have been great. We love you so much. Thanks for any comments, shares, likes, subscriptions. We jumped in subscriptions from week to week a little bit, guys. So help us get our word out there. We think we've got something to say, and we hope you do agree with us. You keep coming back. It's not a fluke. So we love you guys. Thanks for listening in on the coverage, and we will catch you guys next time we take a trip around the bases. Good night, everybody. Coffee always